A man returns to his dark cabin after 3 years of grief and finds smoke rising from his chimney. Inside, a stranger has broken in, not to steal, but to clean. She knows something about the land baron destroying ranchers across the valley, and her arrival puts them both in the crosshairs of a man who's stolen more ranches than anyone can count. Before this is over, blood will spill on courthouse steps and families will lose everything. Stay until the end to see how this plays out. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees by the time Garrett Boone spotted the smoke. He reined his horse to a stop halfway up the ridge trail, squinting through the October dusk at the thin gray column rising from his cabin's chimney. For a moment he just sat there, the wind cutting through his coat, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. That chimney hadn't produced smoke in 3 years. Not since Sarah died. Not since he'd stopped lighting fires altogether because the warmth reminded him too much of what he'd lost. His hand moved to the rifle strapped to his saddle. Could be drifters. Could be worse. Up here in the mountains, 20 miles from the nearest town, you didn't get innocent explanations for things like this. You got thieves who knew an isolated ranch when they saw one, or men running from something, or worse, Mercer's people, sniffing around properties they had no business touching. Garrett urged his horse forward, keeping to the tree line as he approached. The cabin sat in a small clearing backed against the mountain slope. It looked the same as it always did. Weathered logs, sagging porch, shutters hanging crooked. But that smoke kept rising, steady and deliberate, like someone who knew what they were doing had settled in for the evening. He dismounted 50 yards out and approached on foot, rifle ready. The windows glowed with firelight. Through the gaps in the shutters, he could see movement inside. One person, maybe two. He couldn't tell. The front door wasn't locked. It never was. What was the point when you lived alone on a mountain and hadn't seen another soul in weeks? Garrett kicked it open and stepped inside fast, rifle up. A woman stood at his stove, stirring something in a pot. She didn't scream, didn't even jump, just turned her head slowly and looked at him with the kind of calm that made his finger hesitate on the trigger. "You can put that down," she said. Her voice was steady, almost bored. "I'm not armed." "That's not the point," Garrett said. He kept the rifle aimed at her center mass. "Who the hell are you?" "My name's Naomi." She turned back to the stove, stirring the pot. "Naomi Vale. And before you shoot me, you should know I've already cleaned your kitchen, fixed that broken chair you've been walking past for God knows how long, and I'm making stew, venison. Found it hanging in your smokehouse, half forgotten." Garrett stared at her. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a messy braid. Her dress was torn at the hem and patched badly in 2 places. Her hands, visible when she lifted the spoon, were bruised and rough, the kind of hands that had done hard work recently. She didn't look like a thief. She looked like someone who'd run out of options. "I don't remember inviting you," Garrett said. "You didn't." Naomi tasted the stew, frowned, added more salt. "I broke in. Technically. Though broke in is a stretch when your door doesn't even latch properly. So you're a squatter. I'm someone who needed a roof and figured an empty cabin was better than freezing to death." She finally turned to face him fully, setting the spoon down. "I watched this place for 2 days before I came inside. No smoke, no lights, no movement. I thought it was abandoned. It's not. I see that now." She crossed her arms. "You going to shoot me or let me finish cooking?" Garrett lowered the rifle slightly but didn't put it down. He looked around the cabin. She hadn't been lying about the cleaning. The place was different. Not clean exactly, but less chaotic. The dishes that had been piling up for weeks were washed and stacked. The floor had been swept. The chair he'd broken 3 months ago was sitting upright by the table, repaired with what looked like fresh rope binding. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "West. Originally." Naomi turned back to the stew. "Wagon train out of Missouri. We were headed for California, but things went bad in Wyoming. Lost half our group to weather, the other half to cholera. I kept going with what was left, but by the time we hit the territories, it was just me and 2 families who wanted nothing to do with me." "Why not?" "Because my father died on the trail and they decided it was my fault for not nursing him better." She said it flat, no emotion. "They took what supplies I had left and told me to figure it out on my own. So I did." Garrett studied her face. She wasn't lying. You couldn't fake that kind of emptiness. You walked here? He asked. Part of the way. Caught a ride with a freight wagon going through Dry Hollow, then walked the rest when the driver got handsy and I had to leave in the middle of the night. She ladled stew into 2 bowls without asking if he wanted any. I've been on the move for 6 weeks. This is the first place I've stopped. She set 1 bowl on the table and kept the other for herself. Garrett finally lowered the rifle all the way. He propped it against the wall and sat down slowly, eyeing the stew like it might be poisoned. Naomi sat across from him. It's not poisoned. If I wanted you dead, I would have done it while you were sleeping off whatever you were doing out there all day. I was checking fence lines, Garrett said. In October? What's the point? You don't have any cattle running. He looked up sharply. How do you know that? Because I walked your property twice. Naomi ate a spoonful of stew, unbothered. You've got good land, decent water access, a barn that's halfway falling apart, and no stock to speak of. Either you sold everything off or you've given up. I'm guessing the second one. Garrett's jaw tightened. You don't know anything about me. I know you've been living like a ghost. She gestured around the cabin. No food in the pantry except dried beans and salt pork. Bed hasn't been made in weeks. Fireplace full of cold ash. You're not living here. You're just existing. Maybe I like it that way. Maybe, Naomi shrugged. But it's a waste of good land. They ate in silence for a while. The stew was better than anything Garrett had made for himself in months. He hated that. You can't stay, he said finally. I know. Naomi didn't look surprised. I wasn't planning to. I just needed a night or 2 to rest before I move on. Move on to where? Don't know yet. Maybe Dry Hollow. Maybe further south. Somewhere I can find work. Doing what? She gave him a look. Whatever needs doing. I can cook, clean, mend fences, handle livestock. I grew up on a ranch. I know the work. Where was the ranch? Eastern Colorado. We had 200 acres and a good herd. My father built it from nothing. Her voice went quiet. We lost it 4 years ago. How? Naomi's expression darkened. A man named Silas Mercer bought out the land office and started forging deeds. By the time we figured out what was happening, we'd already lost everything. My father spent 2 years fighting it in court, but Mercer had judges in his pocket. We were evicted at gunpoint. Garrett went still. Mercer? You know him? I've heard the name. Garrett set his spoon down. He operates out of Dry Hollow now, owns half the town. Doesn't surprise me. Naomi's hands tightened around her bowl. That's what he does. Moves into a territory, finds ranchers who are struggling, and takes their land through fake debts and legal tricks. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, he owns everything. And your father? Died 6 months after we lost the ranch. Heart gave out. Or maybe he just gave up. She stared into her stew. I don't know which is worse. Garrett didn't say anything. He knew what it was like to lose someone and not know how to keep going after. He knew what it was like to stop caring whether you lived or died. You've got 3 days, he said finally. Naomi looked up. What? 3 days. You can stay here for 3 days, get your strength back, and then you move on. He stood up, grabbing his rifle. Don't touch anything you don't need to touch. Don't go into the back room. And don't make me regret this. I won't. Yeah. Garrett headed for the door. We'll see. He walked out into the cold night air, not bothering to close the door behind him. His hands were shaking. He didn't know if it was anger or something else. Behind him, through the window, he could see Naomi still sitting at the table, staring at nothing. The next morning, Garrett woke before dawn to the sound of hammering. He rolled out of bed, pulled on his boots, and stumbled outside to find Naomi already working on the fence line near the barn. She'd found his tools, rusted and half-broken as they were, and was replacing rotted posts with new wood she must have cut from the stand of pines behind the property. What are you doing? Garrett called. Naomi didn't stop working. Fixing your fence. This section's been down for months. Animals could walk right through. I don't have animals. You should. She drove another nail in with 3 solid strikes. Good pasture like this, you're wasting it. Garrett walked closer, watching her work. She moved efficiently, no wasted motion. Whoever had taught her to work a ranch had taught her right. I told you 3 days, he said. I know. This is day one. Naomi straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cold. I'm not going to sit around doing nothing while I'm here. If I'm using your roof, I'm earning my keep. I didn't ask you to. I know. She picked up another post, but I'm doing it anyway. Garrett wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he kept thinking about what Naomi had said about Mercer, about forged deeds and stolen land, about men who built empires on other people's suffering. He knew Mercer was operating in the valley. Everyone knew. But it had seemed distant, like something that happened to other people, other ranchers. Not him. Now he wasn't so sure. I'm going into town, Garrett said. Don't burn the place down while I'm gone. Naomi just nodded and went back to work. Bob. Dry Hollow hadn't changed much in the 3 years since Garrett had stopped visiting regularly. Same dusty main street, same half-empty saloon, same tired faces watching from shop windows. But there was a new tension in the air, a nervousness that hadn't been there before. Garrett tied his horse outside the land office and walked inside. The clerk behind the desk looked up, startled. Mr. Boone, didn't expect to see you. Need to check something. Garrett leaned on the counter. My property deed, is it still filed here? The clerk blinked. Should be. Why? Just need to see it. The clerk disappeared into the back room and returned a few minutes later with a dusty ledger. He flipped through it, frowning. Here, registered in your name, no liens, no outstanding claims. Everything looks fine. Garrett scanned the page. The seal looked legitimate. The signatures matched what he remembered from when Sarah's father had transferred the land to them. Nothing seemed wrong, but that didn't mean anything. Naomi had said Mercer was good at forgery, good enough that people didn't realize they'd been robbed until it was too late. Has anyone been asking about my land? Garrett asked. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Not that I know of. Why? Just curious. Mr. Boone, if you're worried about... I'm not worried about anything. Garrett pushed away from the counter. Thanks for your time. He walked out before the clerk could ask any more questions. The saloon was mostly empty when he walked in. A few old-timers sat at the bar, nursing drinks. Garrett ordered whiskey and sat in the corner, watching. He didn't have to wait long. Within 10 minutes, a man in an expensive coat walked in, flanked by 2 ranch hands who looked more like hired muscle than cowboys. The man was tall, clean-shaven, with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Silas Mercer. Garrett had never met him face to face, but he recognized him from descriptions. Mercer moved through the saloon like he owned it, which Garrett realized he probably did. He shook hands with the bartender, slapped one of the old-timers on the back, and bought a round for everyone present. Gentlemen, Mercer said loudly, raising his glass, to prosperity, to progress, to the future of this valley. The old-timers muttered half-hearted agreement and drank. Mercer's eyes swept the room and landed on Garrett. His smile widened. You're new, or maybe just unfamiliar. Silas Mercer. He extended a hand. Garrett didn't take it. I know who you are. Do you? Mercer lowered his hand slowly, still smiling. Then you're ahead of most people. And you are? Nobody you need to worry about. Mysterious. Mercer sat down uninvited at Garrett's table. I like that. But in a town this small, everyone's somebody. So, let me guess. You're a rancher, probably north of here, based on the mud on your boots. Mountain property, isolated, maybe struggling to keep things running. Garrett said nothing. I'm right, aren't I? Mercer leaned back, confident. It's what I do. I read people. I read land. It's a gift. He gestured to the bartender for another drink. And I'm guessing you came into town today because you heard something. Maybe a rumor. Maybe a warning. About me. Maybe. Let me save you some trouble. Mercer's smile faded slightly. Whatever you heard, it's exaggerated. I'm a businessman, Mr. Nobody. I buy land, I develop land, I help people who are drowning in debt find a way out. That's all. By taking their property, by offering them options. Mercer's voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. If a man can't pay his debts, if he can't work his land, if he's going to lose everything anyway, I give him a chance to walk away with something. That's more than most people get. And if he doesn't want to sell, Mercer's smile returned. Then he doesn't have to. This is America, free country, free market. But if he changes his mind later, he shrugged. Well, I'm a reasonable man. I'll still make a deal. Garrett stood up. I'm not selling. I didn't ask you to. Mercer watched him with those cold, calculating eyes. But it's good to know where you stand, just in case things change. Garrett walked out without looking back. Mercer. When he got back to the cabin, Naomi was still working. She'd repaired the fence, reinforced the barn door, and started clearing brush from the overgrown pasture. She looked exhausted but determined. You didn't have to do all this, Garrett said. I know. Naomi wiped her hands on her dress. But I wanted to see what this place could look like if someone cared about it. Garrett looked around. The ranch did look different. Not perfect, but alive. Like it had a pulse again. I met Mercer, he said. Naomi's expression changed instantly. Where? Saloon in town. He knew who I was without me telling him. That's what he does. He scouts properties, learns everything about the owners, and waits for the right moment to strike. She stepped closer. What did he say? That he's a businessman, that he helps people. Garrett's jaw tightened. That he's reasonable. He's a liar. Naomi's voice was hard. Everything he says is a lie designed to make you lower your guard. By the time you realize what's happening, you've already signed something or agreed to something, and he owns you. I didn't sign anything. Good. Don't. She looked out at the valley, her expression dark. If he's in Dry Hollow, that means he's already started working this area. He'll target the weakest ranches first, the ones with debts, the ones with missing heirs, the ones where the owners are old or sick or desperate. He'll take those first, then he'll move on to everyone else. Including me. Probably. Naomi met his eyes. You're isolated. You live alone. You haven't been maintaining the property. To him, you look like an easy target. Garrett felt something cold settle in his chest. I'm not easy. I know. Naomi's voice softened slightly. But he doesn't care how tough you are. He cares about whether you have weaknesses he can exploit. And everyone has weaknesses. They stood there in the fading light, two people who'd lost everything once already, staring at the land that might be taken from them next. You said 3 days, Naomi said quietly. Is that still the deal? Garrett looked at her. This strange, stubborn woman who'd broken into his house and started fixing things without being asked. Who'd survived things that would have broken most people? Who knew Mercer's tactics because she'd already been destroyed by them once? No, Garrett said. The deal's changed. Naomi's eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? I mean, you can stay, as long as you need to. He turned toward the cabin. But if you're staying, you're working, real work. We're going to fix this place properly, and we're going to make damn sure Mercer doesn't take it. Why? Garrett stopped at the door. Because I'm tired of losing things, and because if he's coming for me anyway, I'd rather fight than roll over. Behind him, Naomi smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been waiting for permission to stop running and start fighting back. All right, she said. Let's fight. Check. Over the next week, the ranch transformed. Garrett and Naomi worked from dawn until dark, repairing everything that had fallen into disrepair over the past 3 years. They fixed fences, cleared irrigation channels, patched the barn roof, and reinforced the cabin's foundation. Naomi proved to be as capable as she'd claimed. Maybe more. She worked with the kind of focused intensity that came from having nothing left to lose. They didn't talk much during the work. There wasn't time. But in the evenings, when they sat at the table eating whatever simple meal they'd thrown together, Garrett found himself telling her things he hadn't told anyone in years. About Sarah. About the fever that had taken her so fast he hadn't even had time to say goodbye. About how he'd spent 3 years trying to decide whether it was worth staying alive. Naomi listened without judgment, without offering empty comfort. She just listened. And sometimes she talked about her own losses. About her father. About the ranch they'd built together. About watching Mercer's men drag them off their own land while lawyers smiled and showed them forged documents that proved they'd never owned anything at all. He told my father it was business, Naomi said one night, staring into her coffee. That's what I remember most. Not the eviction, not the guns, not the courtroom. Just Mercer standing there in his expensive suit, telling my father that it was nothing personal, just business. Like that made it better. Like stealing someone's life was acceptable as long as you smiled while you did it. What did your father say? Nothing. He just stood there, broken. Naomi's hands tightened around her cup. That's what Mercer does. He doesn't just take your land, he takes your dignity, your will to fight. He makes you feel like you deserved it somehow, like you weren't strong enough or smart enough to keep what was yours. Did you believe that? For a while, she looked up at him, but not anymore. Now I know the truth. Mercer wins because people don't see him coming until it's too late. But if you know what to look for, if you're ready for him, maybe you can stop him. You think we can stop him? I think we have to try. Garrett nodded slowly. Then we'll try. 2 weeks after Naomi's arrival, riders came up the mountain trail. Garrett saw them from the pasture where he was working and immediately headed for the cabin, shouting for Naomi. She emerged from the barn, saw the riders, and her expression went cold. How many? She asked. 4, maybe 5. Garrett grabbed his rifle from inside the cabin. You know them? No, but I know why they're here. She positioned herself near the door, hands steady. Mercer doesn't do his own dirty work. He sends men to deliver messages. The riders stopped 50 feet from the cabin. Their leader shaked, a thick-shouldered man with a scarred face, raised a hand in greeting. Garrett Boone? He called. That's me. My name's Dutch Carver. I work for Mr. Mercer. He sent me to deliver something. Dutch reached into his saddlebag and pulled out an envelope. You want to come get it, or should I bring it to you? Stay where you are. Garrett didn't lower the rifle. What is it? Legal documents. Mr. Mercer's made an offer on your property. Very generous offer. He wanted you to have time to consider it properly. Dutch's smile was unpleasant. He's a fair man. Likes to give people choices. I'm not selling. You haven't even looked at the offer. Don't need to. Garrett's finger rested on the trigger. You can take that back to Mercer and tell him I'm not interested. Not now, not ever. Dutch's smile faded. That's a mistake. Maybe. But it's my mistake to make. Mr. Mercer doesn't like wasting time on people who won't be reasonable. Dutch's voice hardened. And he has ways of making unreasonable people see sense. Is that a threat? It's a warning. Dutch tucked the envelope back into his saddlebag. But if you want to take it as a threat, that's your choice too. He turned his horse and rode back down the trail, his men following. Garrett didn't lower the rifle until they were out of sight. Naomi stepped up beside him. It started. What do you mean? The pressure. The intimidation. She looked at him seriously. First comes the offer. Then come the threats. Then come the accidents. Fence lines cut, livestock poisoned, barns burned. Things that can't be proven, but everyone knows who's responsible. That's how Mercer works. He pushes until you break. I won't break. I know. Naomi's voice was quiet. But we can't do this alone. If Mercer's targeting you, he's targeting other ranchers too. We need to find out who else is fighting him. We need allies. I work alone. Not anymore. She met his eyes. You brought me into this. You told me we were going to fight. You don't get to change your mind now. Garrett wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. He'd been alone for 3 years, and it had nearly killed him. Maybe it was time to try something different. All right, he said finally. We'll ride into Dry Hollow tomorrow. See who's willing to talk. And if nobody's willing, then we'll figure it out ourselves. Naomi nodded. Fair enough. Dry Hollow looked different in daylight. Smaller, somehow. More fragile. Garrett tied his horse outside the general store while Naomi scanned the street, taking in every detail. Where do we start? He asked. The people who've already been hit. Naomi pointed toward a small house at the edge of town. See that place? Shutters are closed, yards overgrown. That's what a Mercer eviction looks like. They walked over. An older woman was sitting on the porch mending a shirt. She looked up when they approached, eyes wary. Can I help you? She asked. Maybe. Naomi stopped at the foot of the porch steps. We're looking for people who've had trouble with Silas Mercer. The woman's expression closed off immediately. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Naomi's voice was gentle but firm. I can see it in your face. He took something from you, probably recently. The woman looked away. Even if he did, what business is it of yours? Because he's coming for us next, and we're not going to roll over. Naomi stepped closer. But we need to know what we're up against. We need to know his tactics, his timeline, his weak points. And you can help us. The woman studied them both for a long moment. Then, slowly, she set down her mending. My husband owned a ranch 10 miles south of here, she said quietly. 200 acres, good water, strong herd. We've been there 30 years. Then Mercer showed up last spring with papers claiming we owed back taxes we'd never heard of. When we said we'd already paid, he showed us receipts that didn't match ours. His receipts had official seals, ours didn't. Forgeries, Naomi said. That's what we thought, but we couldn't prove it. The tax office backed up Mercer's version, said our receipts were fake, that we'd been avoiding payment for years. The woman's voice broke slightly. They gave us 2 weeks to pay what we owed or forfeit the land. We couldn't come up with that kind of money. Nobody could. Mercer bought their ranch at auction for a fraction of what it was worth. Where's your husband now? Garrett asked. Dead. Heart attack, 3 months after we lost everything. She looked at him with hollow eyes. He couldn't live with the shame. Couldn't accept that we'd been beaten. Naomi knelt beside the porch. I'm sorry. I know what that's like. Do you? Yes. Mercer took my family's ranch the same way. Different territory, same tactics. My father died too. Naomi's voice was steady. That's why we're fighting back. Because people like you and me and my father deserve justice. The woman wiped her eyes. You can't fight Mercer. He owns the law around here. Maybe, but laws can be challenged if you have the right evidence. Naomi stood up. Do you still have your original tax receipts? Yes, for all the good they do. Keep them. And if you know anyone else who's been targeted, tell them to keep their documents too. Everything. Every receipt, every deed, every letter. Naomi pulled out a scrap of paper and wrote down directions to Garrett's ranch. If things get worse, come find us. We'll help however we can. The woman took the paper, looking uncertain. Why are you doing this? Because someone has to, Garrett said. They left her on the porch, still holding the paper. Entract. Over the next 3 days, they talked to 6 more families. All of them had similar stories: sudden debts, forged documents, impossible deadlines, forced sales. Mercer had been systematically working his way through the valley, targeting anyone who looked vulnerable. But they also found something else: resistance. Not everyone had given up. A handful of ranchers were still fighting, still refusing to sell, still trying to prove their documents were legitimate. They were scattered, disorganized, and afraid. But they were fighting. Garrett and Naomi gathered names, collected stories, and slowly began to piece together a pattern. Mercer wasn't just stealing land randomly. He was targeting properties connected to the valley's main water supply. If he controlled the water, he controlled everything. He's building an empire, Naomi said one night, spreading maps across the cabin table. Look, every ranch he's taken sits along one of these 3 creeks. If he gets them all, he can charge whatever he wants for water rights. Every rancher in the valley will have to pay him or die of thirst. Garrett studied the map. How do we stop that? We prove the forgeries. We find evidence that his documents are fake, and we take it to someone who can actually do something about it. Naomi tapped one name on her list. There's a retired land examiner living in Canyon Ridge, Walter Grayson. He worked for the federal land office for 20 years before Mercer's people forced him out. If anyone can identify forged seals and fake signatures, it's him. Canyon Ridge is 2 days' ride through rough country. I know, Naomi looked at him. But it's our best chance. Garrett thought about it. Leaving the ranch undefended for 4 or 5 days was risky, but staying here and waiting for Mercer to make his next move felt worse. All right, he said. We leave tomorrow. They set out before dawn, riding hard through the mountain passes. The terrain was brutal. Narrow trails, steep drops, sections where they had to dismount and lead the horses on foot. But they made good time. On the second day, they spotted riders behind them. Mercer's men, Naomi said, shading her eyes against the sun. 3 of them. Maybe 4. How far back? A mile. Maybe less. She looked at Garrett. They're tracking us. Can we outrun them? Not in this terrain. The trail gets worse ahead. Naomi scanned the landscape. But there's a side canyon about a mile north. We could lose them there if we move fast. They pushed the horses harder, veering off the main trail into rougher country. The canyon Naomi had mentioned was barely wide enough for a horse, choked with brush and fallen rock. But it was also twisting and complex, with multiple branches and dead ends, perfect for losing someone. They spent 2 hours working their way through the canyon, doubling back, covering their tracks. By the time they emerged on the other side, the sun was setting and there was no sign of pursuit. "Think we lost them?" Garrett asked. "For now." Naomi didn't sound convinced. "But Mercer knows where we're going. He'll have men waiting in Canyon Ridge." "Then we'll deal with them when we get there." They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses. By morning, they could see Canyon Ridge in the distance, a small mining town nestled in a valley between two peaks. Walter Grayson lived in a small house on the outskirts. He answered the door with a shotgun in his hands, eyes sharp despite his age. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name's Garrett Boone. This is Naomi Vale. We need your help." Grayson looked them over. "With what?" "Silas Mercer." The old man's expression changed. He lowered the shotgun. "Get inside, quickly, Mick." Grayson's house was cluttered with maps, documents, and file boxes. He cleared space at his table and listened while Naomi explained everything. The pattern of thefts, the forged documents, the families who'd lost everything. When she finished, Grayson sat back heavily. "I knew Mercer was still operating. I didn't know it had gotten this bad." "Can you help us?" Garrett asked. "Maybe." Grayson pulled out a magnifying glass and a reference book filled with official seals and signatures. "But I'll need to see the actual documents. The originals, not copies." "We have some." Naomi pulled out the papers they'd collected from the families in Dry Hollow. Not all of them, but enough to establish a pattern. Grayson spent the next hour examining each document carefully, comparing seals, checking dates, studying signatures. Finally, he looked up. "These are forgeries," he said flatly. "Good ones, but forgeries. The seals are close, but the spacing is wrong. And these signatures," he pointed to several documents. "They're traced. You can see the hesitation marks if you know what to look for." "Can you prove it?" Naomi asked. "In court? Maybe. It would depend on finding a judge who isn't in Mercer's pocket." Grayson's expression was grim. "But yes, I can testify to this. I can show exactly how these documents were faked." "Then we need to get you to Dry Hollow," Garrett said. "When?" "As soon as possible. Mercer's escalating. If we wait too long..." Gunfire erupted outside. Garrett dove for cover as the front window shattered. Grayson grabbed his shotgun and returned fire through the broken glass. Naomi pulled her pistol. Where the hell had she been hiding that? And moved to the side window. "How many?" Garrett shouted. "At least 5, Naomi called back. "Mercer's men. They must have gotten here ahead of us." "There's a back door," Grayson said. "Through the kitchen. Leads to the mine shafts. We can lose them underground." They moved fast, staying low. Grayson led them through the kitchen and out into the night. Behind them, Mercer's men were kicking in the front door. The mine entrance was a black hole in the hillside, barely visible in the darkness. Grayson had a lantern ready and lit. They plunged inside, the old man moving with surprising speed through tunnels he clearly knew well. "This connects to the old silver mines," Grayson said, breathing hard. "Multiple exits, but it's easy to get lost if you don't know the way." They ran deeper into the mountain, the sound of pursuit echoing behind them. The tunnels branched and twisted, some collapsing into rubble, others opening into vast chambers. Grayson navigated by memory, choosing turns without hesitation. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged from a different entrance half a mile from Grayson's house. They could see smoke rising from where the house had been. "They burned it," Grayson said quietly. "Everything I had." "We'll make Mercer pay for it," Naomi promised. "Damn right we will." The old man's eyes were hard. "Let's go to Dry Hollow. Let's end this." They rode through the night, pushing the horses to their limits. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, Mercer's men were searching. But they had a head start, and they knew where they were going. By the time they reached the outskirts of Dry Hollow, dawn was breaking, and Garrett realized with cold certainty that they were running out of time. Because smoke was rising from the valley. Not from chimneys, from burning ranches. The smell hit them first. Burning wood, scorched earth, and something else Garrett didn't want to identify. They pushed their exhausted horses down the slope toward the valley floor, where three separate columns of smoke rose against the morning sky. "The Miller place," Naomi said, pointing to the closest fire. "And that's the Hendersons' barn. The third one. I can't tell from here." Grayson squinted through the smoke. "Carmichael Ranch. Has to be. It's the only other property in that direction." Three ranches burning at once wasn't an accident. It was a message. They rode hard toward the Miller property, the closest of the three. What they found made Garrett's stomach turn. The house was gone, reduced to a smoking foundation and charred timbers. The barn had collapsed inward. Fences were torn down, livestock scattered or dead. And in the middle of it all stood John Miller and his wife, staring at the ruins like they couldn't quite process what they were seeing. Garrett dismounted and walked over. "John." Miller turned slowly. His face was streaked with ash and tears. "They came in the night. Maybe a dozen men. Told us we had 1 hour to get out before they burned everything." His voice cracked. "We barely got the kids out. Didn't save anything else. Clothes on our backs. That's it." "Where are your children now?" "With the Hendersons. Or they were." Miller looked toward the next column of smoke. "If the Hendersons got hit too, we'll check." Naomi was already back on her horse. "Stay here. Don't go anywhere alone." They rode to the Henderson place next. The barn was burning, but the house was still standing. Tom Henderson and his two sons were fighting the fire with buckets, trying to save what they could. His wife sat on the porch steps, the Miller children huddled around her. Henderson looked up when they approached. "Boone, didn't expect to see you." "What happened?" "Same as the Millers, I'd guess. Men showed up around midnight, said we had a choice. Sign over the deed or watch everything burn. I told them to go to hell." Henderson wiped sweat and ash from his face. "They burned the barn anyway, said next time it'd be the house with my family inside." "Did you recognize any of them?" "Dutch Carver. I'd know that ugly face anywhere. The rest were hired guns. Nobody local." Henderson threw another bucket of water on the flames, but they were losing the fight. "This is Mercer's doing. He's done waiting for people to sell. He's just taking what he wants now." Grayson dismounted, moving stiffly. If he's escalating this fast, it means something's changed. Something's pushed him to move now instead of later. "Us," Naomi said quietly. "We started organizing people, asking questions, collecting evidence. He knows we're coming for him. So he's burning us out before we can stop him," Garrett finished. Henderson's oldest son stumbled over, coughing from the smoke. "Pa, the barn's gone. We can't save it." "I know, boy." Henderson put a hand on his son's shoulder. "Let it burn. We'll rebuild." "With what money?" The kid's voice broke. "We don't have anything left." Henderson didn't have an answer for that. Garrett looked at Naomi and Grayson. "We need to get to the Carmichael place. Now." They left Henderson and his sons watching the barn collapse and rode toward the third fire. The Carmichael Ranch was further out, closer to the creek that fed most of the valley. When they arrived, they found the house fully engulfed, flames shooting through the roof. There was no sign of anyone fighting the fire. "Carmichael!" Garrett shouted. "Sarah Carmichael!" No answer. Naomi circled the property, looking for tracks. "Multiple riders came through here, maybe 10 or 12. They torched the house and left." She paused near the tree line. "There's blood here. Not much, but fresh." Garrett felt ice in his chest. "Find them." They spread out, searching. It was Grayson who found Sarah Carmichael and her teenage daughter hiding in the root cellar behind the house. They were terrified, shaking, but alive. Sarah looked up at them with wild eyes. "They said if we didn't sign, they'd kill Emma. They had guns to her head. I signed. I signed everything they wanted." "Where's your husband?" Garrett asked. "Dead, heart attack last year." Sarah's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "It's just been me and Emma since then, and now we don't even have that. They took the deed, they took the land, they took everything." Emma was crying silently, her face buried in her mother's shoulder. Naomi knelt beside them. "You're alive. That's what matters right now." "Is it?" Sarah looked at her. "What do we have left to live for?" "Justice." Grayson's voice was hard. "And making sure Mercer pays for what he's done." "How?" "He owns the sheriff. He owns the land office. He probably owns the judge too." Sarah laughed bitterly. "There is no justice. There's just power, and he has all of it." "Not all of it," Garrett said. "Not yet." They got Sarah and Emma onto horses and rode back toward Dry Hollow. By the time they reached town, word of the fires had spread. People lined the street, watching with nervous eyes as they passed. Nobody spoke. Nobody offered help. Fear had settled over the town like a blanket. Garrett took the Carmichael women to the boarding house and paid for a room. Then he, Naomi, and Grayson gathered in the saloon, which was nearly empty despite the early afternoon hour. The bartender approached cautiously. "What'll it be?" "Information," Garrett said. "Where's Mercer?" "Can't say I know." "Can't or won't?" The bartender looked around nervously. "Look, I don't want trouble. Mercer's got eyes everywhere. If I'm seen talking to you—" "3 families just lost everything," Naomi cut in. "Their homes are ashes. You really want to protect the man who did that?" The bartender's jaw tightened. "He's at the land office. Been there since early this morning, filing new deeds for the properties he took last night." He lowered his voice. "And he's called for an emergency court session tomorrow. Claims he needs to formalize the transfers before the end of the month for tax purposes." "Tomorrow?" Grayson's eyes narrowed. "That's not enough time to mount a proper legal challenge." "That's the point," Naomi said. "He wants this done before anyone can stop him." Garrett stood up. "Then we stop him tonight." "How?" the bartender asked, then immediately looked like he regretted speaking. "We take the evidence we have to every rancher in this valley who hasn't been burned out yet. We show them what Mercer's doing, we show them the forgeries, and we make them understand that if we don't stand together, we all fall separately." Garrett looked at Naomi and Grayson. "And tomorrow, we bring it all to court. Every document, every witness, every piece of proof we have." "The judge won't listen," the bartender said. "Maybe not, but everyone else in that courtroom will. And once people see the truth, Mercer can't hide anymore." Garrett headed for the door. "Spread the word. Tell everyone to be at the courthouse at dawn. Anyone who's been hurt by Mercer, anyone who's afraid of him, anyone who's tired of living under his boot, tell them to show up." The bartender nodded slowly. "I'll tell them. Can't promise they'll come." "They'll come," Naomi said, "because they don't have any other choice." They spent the rest of the day riding to every ranch within 10 miles, telling the same story, showing the same evidence. Some people slammed doors in their faces. Others listened but wouldn't commit. But a few, a precious few, agreed to stand with them. By nightfall, they'd secured promises from 8 ranching families to appear at the courthouse. It wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. But it was something. They returned to Dry Hollow after dark and found the town transformed. People filled the streets, talking in hushed groups. The boarding house was packed. The saloon had standing room only. Word had spread faster than Garrett expected. Tom Henderson found them outside the general store. "Boone, the families you visited, they've been talking. Some of them are scared, but others—" He shook his head. "Others are angry, real angry. They're ready to fight." "Fighting's not the answer," Grayson said. "Not yet. We need to win this legally first. And if the legal way doesn't work, then we'll deal with that when it happens." Garrett looked around at the gathering crowd. "But right now we focus on tomorrow. We get everyone who's been hurt by Mercer into that courtroom. We put their stories on record. We make it impossible for anyone to ignore what's happening." Henderson nodded. "I'll spread the word." As he walked away, Naomi moved closer to Garrett. "You know Mercer's not going to let this happen peacefully, right? He's going to push back, hard." "I know. And you're ready for that?" Garrett thought about the 3 burning ranches, about Sarah Carmichael signing away her land with a gun to her daughter's head, about all the families who'd lost everything because one man decided their lives were worth less than his profit. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." They found a place to sleep in the stable behind the boarding house. None of them trusted sleeping in the open, not with Mercer's men prowling around. Garrett took first watch, sitting in the shadows with his rifle across his knees. Naomi joined him after an hour. "Can't sleep?" "Too much to think about." She sat beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not giving up. For fighting." She looked at him in the darkness. "Most people would have let me walk away after 3 days. You didn't." "You didn't want to walk away." "No. But I would have if you'd made me." She was quiet for a moment. "I spent a year running after we lost the ranch, telling myself I'd find somewhere safe, somewhere I could start over. But there's no such place, is there? Mercer's everywhere. Men like him are everywhere. And if you keep running, you just end up dying tired. So you stopped running. I stopped running. She met his eyes. And I found you. Someone who's as stubborn and broken as I am. Someone who understands that some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. We're not going to lose. You don't know that. No, Garrett admitted, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. Naomi smiled faintly. That's either brave or stupid. Probably both. They sat together in the silence, two people who'd been alone too long, finding something like peace in each other's company. Outside, the town settled into uneasy sleep, waiting for a dawn that would change everything. Garrett woke Grayson before sunrise. The old man looked tired but determined. They gathered their documents, checked their weapons, and walked toward the courthouse through empty streets. Others were already gathering: the Miller family, the Hendersons, Sarah Carmichael, and her daughter. More kept arriving as the sun rose. Ranchers Garrett didn't know, shopkeepers, workers from the lumber mill, people who'd been silent for too long. By the time the courthouse doors opened, nearly 50 people had assembled on the steps. The sheriff appeared, looking nervous. Court's not until 9. You all need to clear out. We'll wait, Garrett said. You're blocking public access. We are the public. Tom Henderson stepped forward. And we're accessing our right to witness these proceedings. The sheriff looked like he wanted to argue, but the crowd had grown too large. He retreated inside, probably to warn someone about what was happening. At 8:30, a fancy carriage rolled up to the courthouse. Silas Mercer stepped out, dressed like he was attending a social event rather than a legal proceeding. He paused when he saw the crowd, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled. Well, Mercer said loudly, quite a gathering. I'm flattered so many people are interested in routine property transfers. He started up the steps, forcing people to move aside. But I'm afraid you'll find this all very boring, just paperwork and formalities. Forged paperwork, Grayson called out. Mercer stopped. He turned slowly to look at the old man. Walter Grayson, I heard you were dead. Disappointed? Not at all. Though I'm curious what brings a retired land examiner all the way to Dry Hollow. Mercer's eyes narrowed, especially one who was dismissed for incompetence. I wasn't dismissed. I was forced out because I refused to certify your fraudulent documents. Grayson held up the papers they'd collected. And I'm here to testify to exactly how you've been stealing land through forgery and corruption. The crowd murmured. Mercer's smile didn't waver. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Grayson. I hope you have proof. I have proof. Grayson's voice rang out clearly. Seal numbers that don't match official records, signatures that were traced instead of written naturally, dates that contradict other legal filings, all of it documented, all of it verifiable. By you, a disgraced examiner with a grudge. Mercer shook his head sadly. I don't think anyone will take your word over properly certified legal documents. They'll take the word of the families you destroyed, Naomi said, stepping forward. Every person here has a story about how you stole from them, how you used fake debts and forged papers to take what wasn't yours. Mercer looked at her with cold recognition. Naomi Vale. I remember your father, weak man. Couldn't accept that he'd failed, so he blamed me for his own inadequacy. Naomi's hands clenched into fists, but her voice stayed steady. My father didn't fail. You destroyed him, just like you've destroyed everyone else who stood in your way. If that were true, why aren't I in prison? Mercer spread his hands. Why have no charges ever been filed? Why does the law continue to recognize my legitimate business dealings? He looked around at the crowd. I'll tell you why. Because I operate within the law. I buy land from people who can't afford to keep it. That's not a crime. That's commerce. It's theft when the debts are manufactured, Garrett said. Mercer's eyes locked on him. Ah, Garrett Boone, the hermit from the mountain. I heard you'd come down from your cave. He stepped closer. Tell me, Mr. Boone, do you have any actual evidence of wrongdoing? Or are you just here because you're lonely and these people gave you a purpose? Garrett felt rage rising, but kept it contained. I'm here because you tried to steal my land, and because I watched 3 ranches burn last night on your orders. My orders? Mercer laughed. I was in my hotel room all night. The sheriff can verify that. As for the fires, he shook his head with mock sympathy. Terrible tragedy. But these things happen in the frontier. Accidents, feuds, People who can't pay their debts getting desperate. Nothing to do with me." "You're a liar," Henderson shouted. "Careful," Mercer said softly. "Slander is actionable." The courthouse doors opened. A clerk appeared. "Court is in session. All parties, please enter." The crowd surged forward. The sheriff and 2 deputies tried to maintain order, but there were too many people. Eventually, they gave up and just let everyone file inside. The courtroom was small, designed for maybe 20 people. With 50 crammed in, it was standing room only. Judge Marcus Whitmore took the bench looking annoyed at the crowd. "What is this?" he demanded. "Public interest, Your Honor," the clerk said nervously. "They all want to observe. This is a routine property hearing, not a spectacle." Whitmore banged his gavel. "I'll allow observers, but anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Understood?" Murmured agreement from the crowd. Mercer's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Dalton, stood up. "Your Honor, we're here to formalize 3 property transfers that occurred last night. All legal, all properly documented. The Miller Ranch, the Carmichael property, and a section of the Henderson land," the clerk read from a file, "transferred to Silas Mercer in settlement of outstanding debts." "That's a lie," Miller shouted from the back. "I didn't owe him anything." Whitmore banged his gavel. "You'll have a chance to speak if called. Sit down." Dalton produced documents, laying them out on the table. "As you can see, Your Honor, Mr. Miller had outstanding tax obligations dating back 3 years. Mr. Mercer graciously offered to settle these debts in exchange for the property. The same with Mrs. Carmichael and Mr. Henderson." "I never agreed to that," Sarah Carmichael said, her voice shaking. "They had guns. They threatened my daughter." "Your Honor," Dalton said smoothly, "Mrs. Carmichael signed these documents of her own free will, as witnessed by men who work for Mercer," Naomi interrupted, "men who burned down her house while she watched." Whitmore's gavel came down hard. "Young lady, you will not speak out of turn in my courtroom." "Then let me speak in turn," Grayson said, standing up. "Your Honor, I'm Walter Grayson, former senior land examiner for the Federal Land Office. I have evidence that these documents are forgeries." That got everyone's attention. Even Whitmore looked interested. "What kind of evidence?" the judge asked. Grayson approached the bench with his reference materials. "If I may examine the documents in question, I can show you exactly how they were forged." Dalton objected immediately. "Your Honor, Mr. Grayson was dismissed from his position under questionable circumstances. His testimony is hardly reliable." "I was forced out because I refused to certify Mercer's fraudulent claims," Grayson shot back, "which is exactly why my testimony is reliable." Whitmore considered this. "I'll allow it, but make it quick." Grayson took the documents and spread them out, pulling out his magnifying glass. The courtroom went silent, everyone watching as the old man examined each page carefully. After several minutes, Grayson straightened up. "Your Honor, these tax documents bear seal number TX4471. According to official records, that seal number wasn't issued until 6 months ago, but these documents are supposedly from 3 years ago." He pointed to specific marks. "Additionally, the signatures here show clear evidence of tracing. You can see the hesitation marks where the forger paused to match the original." Dalton stood up. "This is speculation based on sheesh. It's forensic analysis based on 20 years of experience," Grayson interrupted, "and I can prove every word. The seal numbers are verifiable through the Federal Land Office. The signature analysis can be confirmed by any qualified examiner." Whitmore leaned forward, studying the documents himself. His expression was hard to read. "These are serious allegations," he said finally. "They're true," Grayson said. "And if you examine every deed Mercer has filed in the past 2 years, you'll find the same pattern. Forged seals, fake debts, manufactured obligations. He's been systematically stealing land across multiple territories." The courtroom erupted in noise. People shouting, arguing, demanding answers. Whitmore's gavel couldn't restore order. Mercer stood up slowly, his face calm but his eyes cold. "Your Honor, this is nothing but a coordinated attack by people who refuse to accept their own failures. I've operated in good faith, following every legal requirement." "You're a thief," Tom Henderson roared. "You burned my barn. You threatened my family." "I did no such thing," Mercer's voice cut through the chaos. "And unless you have proof, actual proof, not hysterical accusations, you'll keep your mouth shut or face legal consequences." Here's your proof. Naomi threw a folder onto the table. 12 families, 12 identical patterns of fraud. Dates that don't match, seals that didn't exist when the documents were supposedly created, debts that appear out of nowhere with no paper trail. Circumstantial, Dalton said. None of this proves... It proves everything. Grayson slammed his hand on the table. And if this court refuses to acknowledge it, then this court is as corrupt as Mercer is. Whitmore's face went red. Mr. Grayson, you will watch your tongue in my courtroom. Will I? The old man's voice was hard. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've already made up your mind to side with Mercer regardless of the evidence, just like every other judge he's bought. The courtroom went dead silent. Whitmore stood up slowly, his face stone. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then the judge sat back down and looked at the documents again, really looked at them. Mr. Dalton, he said quietly, explain to me how a seal that wasn't issued until this year appears on documents from 3 years ago. Dalton opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. There must be administrative errors in the records. Administrative errors. Whitmore's voice was flat. That's your explanation. Your Honor, if we could have time to verify... No. The judge's gavel came down once, final. I'm suspending these proceedings pending a full investigation into the authenticity of all documents presented by Mr. Mercer in this and related cases. The courtroom exploded again, but this time with a different energy. Hope, maybe. Or just shock that someone in power had actually listened. Mercer's calm facade finally cracked. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. So is forging legal documents, Mr. Mercer. Whitmore stood up. I'm ordering the sheriff to impound all deeds filed by you in the past 24 months. They will be examined by independent experts. If even one is found to be fraudulent, I will personally see that charges are filed. You're making a mistake, Mercer said, his voice low and dangerous. Perhaps. But it's my mistake to make. Whitmore looked out at the crowd. This court is adjourned. Everyone out. Now. People filed out slowly, stunned. Garrett found himself on the courthouse steps with Naomi and Grayson, watching Mercer and his lawyer have a heated conversation by their carriage. We did it, Naomi said quietly. We actually did it. We bought time, Grayson corrected. Mercer's not beaten yet. He'll fight back. Let him fight, Garrett said. We'll be ready. Mercer looked up suddenly, catching Garrett's eye across the street. He smiled, cold and predatory, then climbed into his carriage and rode away. That night, Dry Hollow celebrated. Not loudly, not openly, but in quiet gatherings where people who'd been afraid finally allowed themselves to feel something like hope. The saloon was packed, drinks flowing freely. Tom Henderson bought a round for everyone, grinning ear to ear despite having lost his barn. Garrett sat in the corner with Naomi, watching the crowd. People kept coming over to shake his hand, thank him, ask what came next. He didn't have good answers, but he tried. You did something today, Naomi said after the latest well-wisher left. Something important. We did something, Garrett corrected. No, you. She looked at him seriously. These people were broken, scattered, afraid. You gave them a reason to stand together. That's not nothing. Mercer's still out there. I know, but now people aren't facing him alone. She finished her drink. That makes all the difference. They stayed until the crowd thinned, then walked back toward the stable where they'd left their horses. The street was quiet now, most people having gone home or to bed. They were halfway there when Dutch Carver stepped out of an alley, flanked by 4 armed men. Evening, folks, Dutch said, his hand resting on his pistol. Mr. Mercer would like a word. Garrett's hand moved toward his rifle, but Dutch shook his head. Don't. You draw on us, you die. Simple as that. His ugly smile widened. Now, are you going to come peacefully, or do we do this the hard way? Naomi's voice was steady. We're not going anywhere with you. Figured you'd say that. Dutch nodded to his men. They moved fast, but Garrett was faster. His rifle came up and fired, catching one of Dutch's men in the shoulder. Then everything dissolved into chaos. Gunfire, shouting, people running. Garrett grabbed Naomi's arm and pulled her toward cover as bullets chewed into the wall behind them. Dutch and his remaining men scattered, taking positions behind water troughs and building corners. A full gunfight in the middle of town, and nobody was coming to help because everyone was too scared of Mercer. "We can't stay here," Naomi said, reloading her pistol. "I know." Garrett fired twice more, keeping Dutch pinned. "The livery. We get to our horses, we can outrun them." They moved, using building corners for cover, firing when they had to. One of Dutch's men went down, then another. But Dutch himself was still shooting, still coming. They reached the livery and found Grayson already there, saddling horses with shaking hands. "Heard the gunfire," the old man said. "Figured you'd need a way out." They mounted up and burst out of the livery at a full gallop, Dutch's bullets following them into the night. But darkness and speed were on their side, and within minutes they'd left Dry Hollow behind. They rode hard for an hour before slowing down. Nobody had followed, or if they had, they'd lost the trail. "Mercer's done playing nice," Grayson said, breathing hard. "He was never playing nice," Naomi corrected. "He was just pretending to." Garrett looked back toward town, where distant lights flickered against the black sky. "What now?" "Now we prepare for war," Naomi said, "because that's what this has become. And if we're not ready when Mercer makes his next move, we won't survive it." They rode on through the darkness, three people who'd lost everything once already, riding toward an uncertain future. But this time, they weren't running away. They were riding toward the fight. They reached Garrett's ranch just before dawn, the horses lathered and stumbling from exhaustion. The cabin looked the same as when they'd left it days ago, but something felt wrong. Garrett couldn't place it at first, just an instinct honed from years of living alone in dangerous country. Then he saw the broken window. "Stay here," he told Naomi and Grayson, pulling his rifle. "Like hell," Naomi said, dismounting. She had her pistol out already. They approached the cabin carefully, using the barn for cover. The front door hung open, moving slightly in the wind. Inside, Garrett could see overturned furniture, scattered papers. Someone had been through the place thoroughly. The cabin was empty but destroyed, every drawer pulled out, every cabinet opened, the mattress slashed and stuffing pulled out. They'd been looking for something, and they hadn't been gentle about it. "The documents," Grayson said, rushing to where they'd hidden the copies of evidence. The hiding spot was torn apart, papers scattered everywhere. "They took them. Not all of them, but enough." Garrett surveyed the damage, his jaw tight. "They knew we'd come here. Probably hit this place right after the courthouse." "So Mercer has our evidence now," Naomi said. "He knows exactly what we have on him. Some of it, not everything." Grayson was sorting through the scattered papers. "The originals are still with the families we collected them from, and I have copies in my head. 20 years of examining documents, you learn to remember details." "That won't matter if we're dead," Garrett said. He moved to the window, looking out at the tree line. "This was a message. He's telling us nowhere is safe." Naomi joined him at the window. "Then we don't stay here. We go on the offensive." "With what?" "He's got armed men, money, legal connections. We've got 3 people and some horses." "We've got more than that." Naomi turned to face him. "We've got every rancher in this valley who's afraid of losing everything. We saw them at the courthouse yesterday. They're ready to fight. They just need someone to organize them." Grayson sat down heavily in one of the overturned chairs. "She's right. Mercer's power comes from isolation. He picks people off one at a time, makes each victim think they're alone. But if we bring everyone together, show them they're not alone, we become a target he can't ignore," Garrett finished. "He'll come at us with everything." "He's already coming at us with everything," Naomi pointed out. "At least this way we're ready for it." Garrett looked around his destroyed cabin. Sarah would have hated seeing the place like this. She'd worked so hard to make it a home, and he'd let it die after she was gone. Maybe Naomi was right. Maybe it was time to stop reacting and start fighting back. "All right," he said. "We organize, but we do it smart. We don't gather everyone in one place where Mercer can hit us all at once. We spread out, create a network. Each ranch watches the others, shares information, responds to threats together." "A valley-wide alliance," Grayson said. "It could work, if people actually commit to it." "They'll commit." Naomi was already gathering up the scattered papers, sorting what was salvageable. "Because the alternative is losing everything alone, and people are tired of being alone." They spent the rest of the day cleaning up the cabin and planning. Garrett drew a rough map of the valley, marking every ranch they knew about. 23 properties in total, though only about 15 were still independently owned. The rest Mercer had already taken. We start with the ones who showed up at the courthouse, Naomi said, pointing to specific locations. Henderson, Miller, the Jorgensens, the Wyatt family. They've already proven they're willing to stand up. What about the ones who didn't show? Grayson asked. We talked to them too. Some people just need more convincing. Naomi looked tired but determined. Fear makes people cautious, but it can also make them desperate enough to take risks. We'll need to move fast, Garrett said. After yesterday's courthouse scene, Mercer's going to accelerate his timeline. He can't afford to let this organized resistance gain momentum. So we don't give him time to react. Naomi stood up, wincing slightly. Garrett noticed she was favoring her left side, probably from diving for cover during the shootout in town. We split up, cover more ground. You take the northern ranches, I'll take the ones to the south. Grayson can stay here, compile everything we know about Mercer's operations into something we can show people. You shouldn't ride alone, Garrett said. Neither should you, but we don't have a choice. She met his eyes. This is bigger than keeping each other safe. This is about saving everyone. She was right, and he hated it. They set out an hour later, taking different trails down from the mountain. Garrett headed north toward the Jorgensen place, a sprawling ranch that had been in the family for 2 generations. Eric Jorgensen was in his 60s, tough as boot leather, and one of the few ranchers who'd actually yelled at Mercer's men when they'd come around making offers. The Jorgensen ranch looked fortified when Garrett arrived. New fencing, reinforced gates, and Eric himself standing on the porch with a rifle across his knees. Boone, Eric called out, you alone? Yeah, mind if I come up? Depends. You bringing trouble with you? Probably, but not the kind you're thinking. Garrett dismounted and walked forward slowly, hands visible. I need to talk to you about Mercer. Eric spat tobacco juice off the porch. Everyone needs to talk about Mercer these days. What makes you different? I'm actually doing something about him. That got Eric's attention. He gestured for Garrett to come up. Inside, Eric's wife Anna had coffee ready, like she'd been expecting company. Their 2 grown sons sat at the table, both armed. We heard about the courthouse, Anna said, pouring coffee. Heard you got Judge Whitmore to actually question Mercer's documents. Grayson did that. He's a former land examiner, knows how to spot forgeries. Garrett accepted the coffee gratefully. But that was just the first step. Mercer's not going to stop because one judge asked some questions. So what are you proposing? Eric asked. An alliance. Every independent rancher in the valley, working together, sharing information, protecting each other's property, standing together if Mercer tries to force anyone else out. Eric's older son Lars spoke up. That's asking people to put themselves in danger for their neighbors. Most folks around here don't even like their neighbors. Maybe not, but I bet they like Mercer even less. Garrett set his cup down. He's picked you all off one at a time because you were isolated. But together, you're too big to ignore, too big to intimidate, and definitely too big to burn out without consequences. He burned the Miller place, Anna said quietly. The Hendersons' barn, the Carmichael house. 3 properties in one night, and nobody stopped him. Nobody was organized. Nobody was expecting it. Garrett leaned forward. But now we know what he's capable of. Now we can prepare. Eric studied him for a long moment. You're asking us to go to war. I'm asking you to defend what's yours. Mercer's the one who started the war. Garrett met his eyes. Question is whether you're going to fight back or wait for him to come for you. The Jorgensen family exchanged looks. Some silent communication passed between them. What would this alliance look like? Eric asked finally. Each ranch designates someone to ride patrol. Not all the time, just in shifts. Watch for Mercer's men for suspicious activity. If anyone sees something, they spread the word. We set up signal fires on the high points. 1 fire means trouble, 2 means immediate danger. Everyone responds together. And if Mercer's men show up with torches again? We don't let them burn anything. We defend together. Garrett's voice was hard. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying nobody will get hurt. But I am saying we have a better chance together than we do alone. Lars spoke up again. What about the law? Sheriff's in Mercer's pocket. But there's got to be someone we can appeal to. The federal marshal's office in Denver. Grayson's preparing a formal complaint documenting everything. But that takes time, and Mercer's moving now. Garrett stood up. We need to hold him off long enough for the legal process to work. And we can't do that if we're all fighting separate battles. Anna looked at her husband. Eric, You know what happened to the Simmons family last year? Mercer ruined them in 3 weeks. They lost everything and nobody helped because everyone was too afraid. I know. Eric's jaw worked. And I swore that wouldn't be us. That we'd fight if he came around. He looked at Garrett. All right, we're in. Tell us what you need. They spent the next hour working out details. The Jorgensens would take responsibility for the northern section of the valley, watching 3 other ranches and coordinating with them. Eric's sons would ride out today to spread the word. Garrett left with promises of support and a list of other ranchers who might be willing to join. He hit 3 more ranches before nightfall, getting similar commitments from 2 of them. The third, the Paulson place, wouldn't commit. The old man who owned it just shook his head and said he was too tired to fight anymore. I'll sell when Mercer makes his offer, Paulson said. Take what I can get and move back east. This land's not worth dying for. Garrett couldn't argue with that. Not really. Every man had to decide for himself what he was willing to fight for. He returned to his cabin after dark, exhausted and sore from a full day in the saddle. Naomi was already back, sitting at the table with Grayson, comparing notes. How'd you do? She asked. 4 commitments, 1 refusal. You? 3 and 2. She pushed a list across the table. But 2 of my 3 are strong. The Wyatt family has 5 grown sons, all good with rifles, and Margaret Chen runs her ranch alone, but she's tougher than most men I've met. She's in. Grayson looked up from the document he was working on. That gives us 10 ranches committed, maybe 12 if we count the ones who are sympathetic but haven't fully committed, out of 15 still independent. Not bad for one day, Garrett said. Not good enough if Mercer moves tomorrow. Naomi stood up, stretching. We need to push harder. Visit every ranch, every property owner, everyone who stands to lose if Mercer wins. We also need to think about defense, Grayson said. Mercer's not going to just accept this alliance forming. He's going to strike at it. Let him strike. Naomi's eyes were hard. That'll just prove we were right to organize. They stayed up late into the night, planning patrol routes and signal systems, identifying the most vulnerable ranches and the best defensive positions. It felt almost like military strategy, which made sense. This was war, even if nobody had officially declared it. Garrett fell into bed exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy. He kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Mercer had resources they didn't have, professional gunmen, legal connections, money to burn. What did they have? Farmers and ranchers who were good at working land but hadn't fought a battle in their lives. But they had something else too, desperation. And sometimes that mattered more than training or resources. The next 3 days blurred together. Garrett and Naomi rode constantly, visiting every ranch in the valley, some multiple times. The alliance grew. By the 3rd day, they had 13 ranches committed and 2 more leaning toward joining. But Mercer wasn't idle. Reports started coming in of increased activity. His men were everywhere suddenly, riding in pairs and groups, watching properties, asking questions in town. Dutch Carver was spotted near the Henderson place twice. A stranger nobody recognized was seen making sketches of the Wyatt Ranch layout. He's scouting us, Tom Henderson said, when they all gathered at the Jorgensen Ranch for their first coordination meeting. Figuring out who's with you, who's against him. Good, Naomi said. Let him know who his enemies are. Makes it easier for everyone to pick sides. But Margaret Chen, the Chinese woman who'd been running her ranch alone since her husband died 3 years ago, shook her head. In my country, we have a saying, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. You're all sticking up very far right now. Would you rather we stay down? Eric Jorgensen asked. Let Mercer take whatever he wants? I'm just saying we should expect the hammer. Margaret's English was perfect but accented. And be ready when it falls. She was right. The hammer fell 2 nights later. Garrett was checking the fence line on the eastern edge of his property when he saw the glow, orange light flickering against the night sky, too bright and too steady to be anything but fire. He rode toward it at a gallop, already knowing what he'd find. The Paulson place was burning. The old man who'd refused to join the alliance, who'd said he was just going to sell and leave, was watching his house collapse into flames. His wife stood beside him, weeping. What happened? Garrett asked, dismounting. Paulson turned to him with dead eyes. Mercer's men. They came an hour ago. Said since I wasn't selling, they'd make sure I had nothing left to sell. Set fire to the house while we were in the barn. We barely got out. Did you recognize them? Dutch Carver and 4 others. Didn't hide their faces. Didn't care who saw. Paulson's voice cracked. They said this is what happens to people who don't cooperate, that anyone who joins your alliance gets the same treatment. Garrett felt cold rage settling in his chest. Where are they now? Gone. Rode off laughing. Paulson grabbed Garrett's arm. I was wrong. I should have joined you, should have fought. Now I've got nothing, and Mercer's going to take the land anyway because I can't pay to rebuild. You can stay with us, Garrett said. At my place. It's not much, but no. Paulson pulled away. I'm done. We're leaving. Going to my brother's place in Kansas. This valley can burn for all I care. Garrett wanted to argue, but knew it was pointless. Paulson was broken. Mercer had won this round. He rode back to his cabin and found Naomi and Grayson already awake, having seen the fire from the mountain. Paulson place? Naomi asked. Yeah, Dutch Carver and his men. Did it openly, made sure everyone knew it was a message. Then we send a message back, Naomi said. How it? She looked at him with fierce determination. We don't scatter, we don't hide. We gather every member of this alliance tomorrow at the Henderson Ranch. It's the most central location, and we make it clear that we're not afraid. That burning one ranch just makes us stronger. Or it makes us a target, Grayson said. Putting everyone in one place could be exactly what Mercer wants. Let him come. Naomi's hands were shaking with anger. I'm so tired of running from this man, of watching him destroy good people while everyone's too afraid to stop him. If he wants a fight, let's give him one. Garrett understood the feeling, but he also understood tactics. If we gather everyone openly, he'll know about it. He might hit us while we're all together. Good. Then we'll be ready. All of us, armed, prepared. Naomi looked between them. This stops being about defense and becomes about showing strength. Mercer thinks fear will break us apart. We prove him wrong. Grayson rubbed his face tiredly. It's risky. Everything's risky now, Naomi countered. But doing nothing gets us burned out one by one. At least this way we control the terms. Garrett thought about it. About the Paulsons fleeing to Kansas. About the Miller family who'd lost everything. About Sarah Carmichael signing away her land with a gun to her daughter's head. About every person Mercer had destroyed because they were alone and afraid. We do it, he said. Send word to everyone. Tomorrow at noon. Henderson Ranch. Everyone comes armed and ready to defend if necessary. They spent the rest of the night spreading the word. Riders went out to every Allied ranch with the same message. Some people would think they were crazy. Maybe they were. But Garrett was done watching Mercer win by default. By noon the next day, the Henderson Ranch was crowded with people. 13 ranching families, maybe 60 people total when you counted everyone. Men, women, older children. Not all of them armed, but enough. Tom Henderson had cleared his main pasture for the gathering, and people stood in nervous clusters, talking quietly. Mercer's men were watching from the ridge. Garrett could see them clearly, making no attempt to hide. Counting numbers, assessing strength, reporting back to their boss. They're not even hiding anymore, Henderson said, following Garrett's gaze. Why would they? Mercer wants us to know he's watching. Garrett turned to face the crowd. Which is fine, let him watch. He stepped up onto a wagon bed so everyone could see him. The conversations died down. Most of you know why we're here, Garrett started. His voice felt rough, unused to speaking to groups. The Paulson place burned 2 nights ago. Mercer's men did it openly, making sure we all knew it was a warning, a threat against anyone who stands with us. Murmurs ran through the crowd. I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. Mercer has resources we don't have. Professional gunmen, legal connections, money. Garrett looked around at all the tired, scared, determined faces. But he doesn't have what we have. He doesn't have community. He doesn't have people willing to stand together and defend what's theirs. Pretty words, someone called out. But words don't stop bullets. No, they don't. Garrett nodded toward the ridge where Mercer's men sat watching. Those men up there, they're counting on us being too afraid to fight back, too divided, too alone. And until now, they've been right. Mercer's picked us off one at a time because we let him. What choice did we have? Another voice asked. The choice we're making right now. Naomi stepped up beside Garrett. To stop being victims. To stop waiting for someone else to save us. To stand together and make it clear that this valley doesn't belong to Silas Mercer. And what happens when he comes with torches again? Margaret Chen asked. When he burns more of us out? We fight back, Eric Jorgensen said, stepping forward. My family's been on our land for 40 years. My father built that ranch from nothing. I'll be damned if I'm going to let some land-grabbing thief take it without a fight. And if you die fighting? Someone asked. Then I die on my own land instead of watching it burn from a distance. Eric's voice was hard. Some things are worth dying for. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then Tom Henderson spoke up. Eric's right. I already lost my barn. But I've still got my house, my family, my land, and I'm not giving any of it up because Mercer thinks he can scare me. He looked around at his neighbors. We all came to this valley looking for something better. Freedom. Opportunity. A chance to build something that belonged to us. Well, this is where we decide if we actually meant that, or if it was all just talk. More people started speaking up, sharing their own stories of near misses with Mercer, of friends and family who'd been driven out, of watching the valley slowly fall under one man's control. The fear was still there. Garrett could hear it in their voices. But something else was growing too. Anger, determination, a sense that maybe, just maybe, they could win this. Grayson stepped forward, carrying the documents he'd been compiling. I've spent the last week putting together a formal complaint to submit to the federal marshal's office. Every forged document, every illegal seizure, every act of intimidation and violence, it's all documented. With your permission, I'll take this to Denver myself. How long will that take? Someone asked. A week there, a week back, assuming the marshals take it seriously. Maybe less if we're lucky. Grayson looked tired but resolute. But federal investigations move slowly. Even if they believe everything, it could be months before charges are filed. We don't have months, Margaret said. Mercer's moving now. I know, which is why we need to hold him off until the law catches up. Grayson looked around at the crowd. And that means doing exactly what you're doing now, standing together, making it too expensive, too difficult, too risky for him to continue operating the way he has been. A young woman Garrett didn't know raised her hand tentatively. What if we just left? Sold to Mercer for whatever he'd pay and moved somewhere safer? There is nowhere safer, Naomi said, and her voice had that hard edge that came from experience. Mercer's not unique. There are men like him everywhere, in every territory, every town. They use the same tactics, the same legal tricks, the same intimidation. If you run from him, you'll just run into someone else doing the same thing somewhere else. So we're trapped, the woman said. No, we're making a stand. Naomi's voice softened slightly. And I know that's scary. Believe me, I know. My family tried to fight Mercer before and we lost. My father died because of it. I spent a year running before I ended up here. And I'm telling you right now, running doesn't work. It just means you die tired and alone instead of fighting for something that matters. The woman looked down at her feet but didn't argue. Garrett surveyed the crowd. They were scared. They were right to be scared. But they were here, which meant something. We need to make some decisions, he said. Practical ones. First, the patrol system we talked about. Each ranch commits to watching specific sections and reporting any suspicious activity immediately. Second, the signal fire system. 1 fire means possible trouble, 2 means immediate danger, 3 means gather at the nearest strong point. Third, we establish rotating guard positions at the most vulnerable ranches. Who decides what's vulnerable? Lars Jorgensen asked. We all do. Together. Garrett gestured to the rough map they'd brought. But I'd say any ranch that's been directly threatened, any property Mercer's made recent offers on, and any location that controls water or key trails. They spent the next 2 hours hammering out details. Who would patrol when, where the signal fire positions would be, how to coordinate responses. It wasn't perfect, and there were arguments about specific arrangements, but by mid-afternoon they had something that resembled an organized defense. The men on the ridge were still watching. Let them watch, Tom Henderson said, noticing Garrett's attention. Let them report back to Mercer that we're not scattered anymore, that we're ready. As the sun started to drop, people began heading back to their own ranches, but there was something different in the way they moved now, less defeated, less alone. Garrett was helping Henderson clear away the last of the gathering when a rider came thundering up the trail, one of the Wyatt boys, his horse lathered. Fire! He shouted. Signal fire on Prescott Ridge, 2 fires. Everyone still present went still. 2 fires meant immediate danger. Where? Garrett demanded. The Chen Ranch, Margaret's place. The boy was breathing hard. Riders were spotted heading that way about an hour ago. She lit the signal before they arrived. Margaret had left the gathering an hour earlier, wanting to get back before dark. She'd be alone at her ranch except for one hired hand. How many riders? Eric Jorgensen was already heading for his horse. At least 8, maybe more. 8 against 2. And Margaret had lit the signal, meaning she expected violence. Everyone mount up, Garrett ordered. This is what we've been planning for. Chen Ranch now. Within 5 minutes, 20 riders were galloping across the valley toward Margaret's property. The sun was nearly down now, casting long shadows across the grassland. In the distance, Garrett could see smoke rising. Not from a signal fire, from a burning building. They rode harder, pushing the horses to their limits. As they got closer, Garrett could hear gunfire. Someone was shooting back, which meant Margaret was still alive and fighting. They crested the final rise and saw the scene below. The ranch house was on fire, flames climbing the walls. The barn was already fully engulfed. 8 riders circled the property, firing at the house. Margaret and her hired hand were shooting back from the windows, but they were outgunned and running out of time. Dutch Carver sat on his horse at a safe distance, watching the fire. Take them, Garrett said, raising his rifle. 20 rifles fired almost simultaneously. 2 of Mercer's men went down immediately. The others scrambled for cover, suddenly facing a force they hadn't expected. Dutch wheeled his horse around, saw the oncoming riders, and made a decision. He spurred his mount and fled, half his men following. The others were cut off, trapped between the house and the approaching alliance. "Drop your weapons," Tom Henderson roared. The remaining men looked at each other, looked at their fallen companions, looked at the 20 armed ranchers surrounding them. 3 of them dropped their guns. The 4th tried to run and took a bullet in the leg for his trouble. Garrett rode straight to the house. Margaret emerged from the front door, her face covered in soot, carrying a rifle. "About time you all showed up," she said, coughing. "I was starting to think that signal system was just for show." "Are you hurt?" Naomi asked, dismounting. "No. Angry, but not hurt." Margaret looked at her burning house. "They gave me the same choice they gave everyone. Sell or burn. I told them where they could shove their offer." Eric and his sons were already organizing a water line from the well, fighting to save what they could. The barn was a loss, but the house might be salvageable if they acted fast. Garrett approached the captured men. They knelt in a line, hands behind their heads, looking significantly less confident than they had 5 minutes ago. "Who sent you?" Garrett asked, though he already knew the answer. None of them spoke. "Let me rephrase. Dutch Carver was leading you, which means Mercer sent you. I want to know what your orders were." Still silence. Tom Henderson walked over and grabbed one of them by the collar. "My barn burned 4 days ago. I'm not in a patient mood. Talk." The man swallowed hard. "Mercer said to make examples. Said anyone who joined your alliance needed to understand the price. Chen, Henderson, Jorgensen, Boone. We were supposed to hit all of you tonight." "All at once?" "Split into groups, hit multiple targets, spread you out so you couldn't help each other." The man looked sick. "But you moved faster than we expected." "Because we actually care about our neighbors," Margaret said coldly. Novel concept. Garrett looked at the prisoners. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back to Mercer, and you're going to tell him that his message was received, and then you're going to deliver our message." "What message?" "That this valley is united now, that every ranch in this alliance will defend every other ranch, that he can't burn us out one at a time anymore because we're not alone." Garrett's voice was hard. "And if he wants to escalate, we'll match him, every single time." "He'll kill us for failing," one of the other men said. "Then maybe you should find a different employer." Naomi stepped forward. "Because the next time we catch Mercer's men attacking our people, we're not going to be so gentle." They let the men go, watching them ride off into the darkness. It was a calculated risk. They could have held them for the sheriff, but the sheriff wouldn't do anything. Better to send a message directly. The fire was mostly under control by the time the prisoners disappeared from view. Margaret's house had survived, barely, though it would need serious repairs. The barn was gone completely. "You can stay with us," Eric Jorgensen offered, "until you rebuild." "I'll stay right here," Margaret said firmly. "This is my land. I'm not leaving it." Then we'll take shifts guarding it, Tom Henderson said. Make sure Mercer's men don't come back. And we'll help rebuild, Lars Jorgensen added. All of us. Margaret looked around at the soot-covered, exhausted ranchers who'd dropped everything to defend her property. Her eyes got wet, but she blinked the tears away. Thank you, she said quietly. They stayed through the night, taking turns on watch. Nobody trusted that Mercer wouldn't send another wave. But the night passed quietly, and by dawn, people started drifting back to their own properties. Garrett, Naomi, and Grayson rode back to Garrett's cabin in silence. They were all exhausted, running on adrenaline and coffee. We won tonight, Naomi said finally. They attacked us and we fought back. We saved Margaret's house. Tonight, Garrett agreed. But Mercer's not going to stop. If anything, we've just made him angrier. Good. Naomi's jaw was set. Let him be angry. Angry people make mistakes. Or they escalate until someone dies, Grayson said quietly. They rode on, watching the sunrise paint the valley in shades of gold and red. Beautiful country. Worth fighting for. Worth dying for, maybe. But Garrett hoped it wouldn't come to that. He hoped, but he wasn't counting on it. Because men like Silas Mercer didn't stop until they were stopped. And that meant this fight was only beginning. Grayson left for Denver 3 days after the attack on Margaret's ranch, carrying documents that represented months of suffering compressed into legal language. Garrett and Naomi rode with him as far as Canyon Ridge, watching him disappear into the mountain passes that would take him toward federal justice, however slow that might come. Think he'll make it? Naomi asked. He made it out of Canyon Ridge when Mercer's men burned his house. He's tougher than he looks. Garrett turned his horse back toward the valley. Question is whether the marshals will care enough to do anything. They will. Grayson's documented everything. But Naomi didn't sound entirely convinced. And even if they don't move immediately, having an official complaint on record means Mercer can't operate in the shadows anymore. They rode in silence for a while, both knowing that official complaints and legal processes moved at a pace that had nothing to do with the violence happening right now in the valley. Mercer wouldn't wait for federal marshals to investigate. He'd push harder, faster, trying to consolidate his control before outside forces could intervene. When they got back to Garrett's cabin, Tom Henderson was waiting with news that made Garrett's stomach sink. Mercer's called another court session, Henderson said. Day after tomorrow. Emergency petition to formalize the remaining property transfers and establish water rights for the entire valley. Water rights? Naomi's eyes went wide. If he controls the water, he controls everything, Garrett finished. Every ranch downstream has to pay him for access or watch their stock die of thirst. Henderson nodded grimly. Judge Whitmore tried to delay it, said he needed more time to review the documents from the last hearing, but apparently the territorial governor's office sent word that these transfers need to be resolved immediately for tax purposes. Mercer got to the governor, Naomi said, or someone in that office, pushed them to force Whitmore's hand. Either way, it's happening. Whitmore set the hearing for sunrise day after tomorrow, says he wants it done early, before crowds can gather. Henderson looked exhausted. We need to be there, all of us. He just said he doesn't want crowds, Garrett pointed out. I don't care what he said. This affects every ranch in the valley. We have a right to be there. Henderson's jaw was set. Besides, Mercer's going to pack that courtroom with his own people. We need to match numbers, or Whitmore's going to think the whole valley supports Mercer's claims. They spent the rest of that day spreading word. Every ranch in the alliance needed to send representatives to the courthouse. It was risky, leaving properties less defended, gathering in one place where Mercer could track who opposed him. But Henderson was right. If they didn't show up, Mercer would win by default. That night, Garrett couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch watching stars wheel overhead, thinking about Sarah. She'd loved this land, loved the idea of building something permanent in a world that felt temporary and fragile. He'd let it all fall apart after she died, let the ranch decay into barely functional existence. But these past weeks, working alongside Naomi, organizing the alliance, fighting back against Mercer, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. Can't sleep either? Naomi's voice came from the doorway. Too much to think about. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Tomorrow's going to be hard. I know. Mercer's going to have everything prepared. Documents, witnesses, legal arguments. We're going in with nothing but the truth, and that doesn't always win in courtrooms. It won, Garrett said. Last time. Whitmore listened to Grayson's testimony. Last time Mercer wasn't expecting resistance. This time he knows we're coming. Naomi looked out at the dark valley. He'll have answers for everything we throw at him. Explanations for the forged seals, justifications for the property seizures. He's had weeks to prepare. So what are you saying? I'm saying we might lose tomorrow, legally, and we need to be ready for what comes after that. Garrett turned to look at her. What do you think comes after? Violence. Real violence, not just property destruction. Her voice was quiet but certain. If Mercer gets legal control of the water rights, he'll start enforcing them, cutting off ranches, demanding payments people can't afford. And when they can't pay, he'll seize the land. Anyone who resists... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Then we resist anyway, Garrett said. People will die. People are already dying. The Paulsons lost everything and fled. Sarah Carmichael's daughter watched her mother sign away their home with a gun to her head. John Miller's kids are living in someone else's barn because their house burned down. Garrett's voice was hard. The violence is already here. We're just deciding whether to fight back or let it crush us. Naomi was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, My father used to say that the measure of a man wasn't whether he stood up for himself, but whether he stood up for others. When standing up cost him something. Wise man. Dead man. The bitterness in her voice was sharp. His wisdom didn't save him, didn't save our ranch, didn't stop Mercer from taking everything we built, but it brought you here, to this fight, to people who needed someone who understood what Mercer does. Garrett met her eyes. Maybe that's worth something. Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. Or maybe we're all just repeating my father's mistakes, thinking we can beat a system that's designed to let men like Mercer win. Then we changed the system. Naomi laughed, but it was a hollow sound. With what? We're ranchers and farmers. We don't have power. We have each other. That's more power than Mercer wants us to realize we have. Garrett stood up. I'm going to try to sleep. We need to be sharp tomorrow. Naomi stayed on the porch, staring into darkness. They rode into Dry Hollow before dawn, joining a steady stream of ranchers converging on the town. The streets were already crowded despite the early hour. Garrett counted at least 40 people from the Alliance, maybe more. They gathered near the courthouse, talking in low voices, checking weapons even though everyone knew guns wouldn't be allowed inside. Mercer arrived in his usual carriage, flanked by Dutch Carver and a dozen hired guns. He looked calm, almost bored, like this was just another day's business. When he saw the crowd, he smiled. Quite a turnout, Mercer said to no one in particular, almost like people care about boring legal proceedings. We care about stopping thieves, Margaret Chen called out. Mercer's smile didn't waver. Mrs. Chen, I heard about the unfortunate fire at your property. Terrible accident. I do hope you'll accept my offer to purchase what remains. Very generous terms given the damage. Go to hell. Such hostility. Mercer shook his head sadly. And after I've tried so hard to help this community prosper. The courthouse doors opened. The crowd surged forward, everyone trying to get inside at once. The sheriff and his deputies tried to maintain order, but there were too many people. Eventually, they just gave up and let everyone file in until the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Judge Whitmore took the bench looking like he hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn. He banged the gavel weakly. This court is in session. We're here to address Mr. Mercer's petition regarding property transfers and water rights allocations for the Valley region. Whitmore shuffled papers without looking up. Mr. Dalton, you may present your case. Mercer's lawyer stood smoothly. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. My client has acquired numerous properties in this valley through legitimate purchase agreements. These acquisitions give him majority control of the primary water sources feeding the region. We're simply requesting formal recognition of the associated water rights, as is standard procedure. Nothing standard about it, Tom Henderson shouted from the back. Whitmore's gavel came down hard. Order! I will have order, or I will clear this courtroom. Dalton continued as if there'd been no interruption. The properties in question were all acquired legally, with proper documentation, witness transfers, and fair compensation. We have deed records, purchase agreements, and signed affidavits from all parties involved. He started laying out documents on the table. Lots of documents. An overwhelming amount of paper designed to bury any objections under sheer volume. Additionally, Dalton said, we have testimony from the Territorial Land Office confirming that all transfers were properly recorded and all fees paid. The legitimacy of these transactions is not in dispute. It damn well is in dispute, Eric Jorgensen called out. Mr. Jorgensen. Whitmore looked tired. One more outburst and you'll be removed. Dalton smiled thinly. Your Honor, I understand emotions run high when discussing property matters, but the law is clear. My client followed all proper procedures. The water rights are merely a formality acknowledging what already exists legally. Whitmore looked at the documents without enthusiasm. Does anyone wish to contest these claims? Garrett stood up. I do, Your Honor. On what grounds? On the grounds that the underlying property transfers were obtained through fraud, forgery, and intimidation. Garrett moved forward through the crowded room. Walter Grayson, a federal land examiner, already testified that the documents Mercer used contained forged seals and traced signatures. Mr. Grayson is not present today, Dalton said smoothly, and his testimony at the previous hearing was inconclusive at best. He showed some discrepancies, yes, but could not definitively prove forgery. Because you had the evidence removed before he could examine it properly, Naomi said, standing beside Garrett. Mercer's men ransacked multiple properties looking for the original documents we'd collected. Whitmore held up a hand. Miss, I need you to state your name for the record. Naomi Vale, my family's ranch in Colorado was stolen by Silas Mercer 4 years ago, using the exact same tactics he's using here. Forged tax documents, manufactured debts, corrupt officials. My father fought it for 2 years before he died. Mercer stood up slowly. Your Honor, I remember the Vale situation, a sad case of a rancher who overextended himself financially and refused to accept responsibility for his debts. His daughter has been spreading false accusations against me ever since. They're not false, Naomi's voice shook with rage. You destroyed my family, and now you're doing it to everyone in this valley. Prove it, Mercer said simply. Show me evidence. Real evidence, not emotional appeals and conspiracy theories. The evidence is in the documents, Garrett said. The seal numbers that don't match official records. The signatures that were traced. The debts that appeared from nowhere. All of which has been explained, Dalton interjected. Administrative errors in record keeping, clerical mistakes in seal numbering, legitimate debts that were poorly tracked. None of it proves forgery. It proves a pattern, Garrett shot back. Patterns aren't proof, Mr. Boone. Whitmore rubbed his temples. Do you have the original documents Mr. Grayson examined? Some of them. The rest were stolen when Mercer's men... Allegedly stolen, Dalton interrupted. You have no proof my client's employees were involved in any theft. Dutch Carver and his men have been seen at multiple properties, Tom Henderson started. Being seen is not a crime, Dalton said smoothly. Mr. Carver is employed as a property assessor. Of course he visits ranches. That's his job. The courtroom erupted in angry shouting, people calling out their own stories of intimidation, of midnight visits, of threats and burned buildings. Whitmore's gavel kept banging, but nobody listened. Finally, the judge stood up and shouted, Enough! Everyone out except the primary parties. I will not conduct a hearing in the middle of a riot. The sheriff and deputies started pushing people toward the door. The crowd resisted, but they were outnumbered. Slowly, reluctantly, people filed out until only Mercer, Dalton, Garrett, Naomi, and a few witnesses remained. Whitmore sat back down heavily. Now, without the gallery turning this into a circus, let's address the actual legal questions. Mr. Boone, do you have concrete evidence, documents, testimony from credible witnesses, anything substantive that proves Mr. Mercer's property acquisitions were fraudulent? Garrett looked at Naomi. They had testimony from families who'd been forced out. They had Grayson's analysis of the seal numbers. They had the pattern of seizures targeting water access properties. But did they have the kind of airtight proof that would hold up against Mercer's lawyers and documentation? No. Not without Grayson here. Not without the original documents that had been stolen. The evidence is in Denver, Garrett said. Walter Grayson is presenting a formal complaint to the federal marshal's office with full documentation of the forgeries. Then this court will wait for the federal investigation before making any final determinations, Whitmore said. Dalton stood immediately. Your Honor, that could take months. Meanwhile, my client's legitimate business interests are held in limbo. That's not justice. Neither is rushing through property transfers while fraud allegations are being investigated, Whitmore countered. He looked old and tired. I'm suspending these proceedings pending. The courthouse door slammed open. Dutch Carver strode in, holding a piece of paper. Your Honor, I apologize for the interruption, but I have urgent news relevant to these proceedings. Dutch handed the paper to Whitmore. A telegram from Denver. Arrived at the telegraph office 10 minutes ago. Whitmore read it, his face going pale. He looked up at Garrett and Naomi. Walter Grayson is dead, the judge said quietly. Killed in Denver 3 days ago. The telegram says it was a robbery, that he was found in an alley with his throat cut and his belongings stolen. The courtroom went silent. Garrett felt the words hit him like a physical blow. Naomi made a small sound, almost a gasp. That's convenient, she said, her voice shaking. Very convenient timing. Tragic is what it is, Mercer said, and he actually managed to sound sympathetic. An old man traveling alone, carrying valuable documents. Denver can be a dangerous city. You had him killed, Garrett said flatly. Careful, Mr. Boone. Mercer's voice went cold. Accusing someone of murder without evidence is slander. Actionable slander. Your Honor, Naomi started. Enough. Whitmore set the telegram down. Mr. Grayson's death is a tragedy and will be investigated by Denver authorities. But it doesn't change the situation before this court. Without his testimony, without the documents he was carrying, I have no basis to delay these proceedings further. You can't be serious, Garrett said. I'm deadly serious, Mr. Boone. I am bound by law, not by suspicion or conspiracy theories. Whitmore looked at the documents Dalton had presented. Mr. Mercer's acquisitions appear legally valid. The water rights follow from those acquisitions. Unless you can present concrete evidence to the contrary, evidence that exists right now in this courtroom, I have no choice but to approve his petition. Give us time, Naomi pleaded. A week. Let us go to Denver, retrieve Grayson's documents. If such documents still exist, Dalton said. The telegram indicated Mr. Grayson's belongings were stolen, most likely sold by now to various pawn shops. Whitmore rubbed his face. He looked like a man being forced to do something he didn't want to do. I'll give you 48 hours. Bring me evidence, real, tangible evidence of forgery or fraud, and I'll reconsider. Otherwise, I approve Mr. Mercer's petition at the end of that period. Your Honor, my client needs certainty for his business operations, Dalton objected. 48 hours is what I'm offering, Whitmore said firmly. Take it or leave it, Counselor. Dalton looked at Mercer, who nodded slightly. We'll take it, Your Honor, Dalton said. Though we maintain this delay is unnecessary and prejudicial to my client's interests. Whitmore banged his gavel. This hearing is adjourned. We reconvene in 48 hours with or without additional evidence. Garrett and Naomi walked out of the courthouse into a crowd of anxious faces. Everyone started asking questions at once, wanting to know what happened, what the judge decided. Grayson's dead, Garrett said, and the crowd went quiet. Killed in Denver. The documents he was carrying are gone. Mercer had him killed, someone said. We can't prove that. Garrett's voice was hollow. We can't prove anything. Not without the evidence Grayson compiled. So what now? Tom Henderson asked. Now we have 48 hours to find proof or Mercer gets everything. Naomi's hands were clenched into fists. The water rights, the properties, legal control of the entire valley. The crowd started murmuring, fear and anger mixing into a volatile combination. People who'd been willing to stand together while there was hope suddenly faced the reality of losing anyway. We should fight, Lars Jorgensen said. Stop waiting for the law to save us and just fight. Fight with what? Margaret Chen asked. Against trained gunmen and legal authority, we'd lose, badly. So we just surrender? Lars looked around at the crowd. Let Mercer take everything we've built? Nobody's surrendering, Garrett said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. We use the time we have, 48 hours. We search for evidence, we talk to anyone who might have information, we go to Denver, Naomi interrupted. Right now, find out what really happened to Grayson. Recover whatever documents survived, bring them back before the deadline. That's 2 days hard riding just to get there, Tom Henderson said. You'd never make it back in time. Then we don't come back. We send the evidence by telegraph, by courier, by whatever means necessary. Naomi looked at Garrett. But we don't just sit here waiting for Mercer to win. She was right. Sitting here felt like giving up. I'll go with you, Garrett said. No. Naomi shook her head. The Alliance needs you here. If Mercer makes a move while we're waiting for the court deadline, someone has to coordinate the response. That's you. I'm not letting you ride to Denver alone. I won't be alone. Lars Jorgensen stepped forward. I'll go. I can ride fast and I know the trails. His father Eric looked like he wanted to argue, but couldn't find a good reason. You be careful, boy. Mercer's people might be watching the Denver road. Let them watch. Lars checked his rifle. We'll take the mountain trails. Harder riding, but less chance of ambush. Naomi nodded. We leave within the hour. Garrett, keep everyone together. Don't let fear scatter the Alliance. And if the 48 hours runs out before you get back, she met his eyes, then you do whatever you think is right. They supplied Lars and Naomi with provisions for the hard ride ahead, dried meat, hardtack, grain for the horses. The crowd watched them prepare, knowing that everything now depended on two people riding into unknown danger. Garrett walked Naomi to her horse, away from listening ears. This is a long shot, he said quietly. I know, but it's the only shot we have. She checked her saddle straps, not looking at him. Grayson didn't die for nothing. He must have gotten those documents to someone, left them somewhere. If there's any chance they survived, I'll find them. And if you can't, then I'll find something else. Anything that proves Mercer's guilt. Her jaw was set with familiar determination. I'm not coming back empty-handed. Naomi, don't. She finally looked at him. Don't tell me to be safe or careful or any of that. We're past safe. We've been past safe since the moment I walked into your cabin. I was going to say thank you. That stopped her. For what? For not giving up, for fighting when it would have been easier to run, for reminding me that some things are worth the cost. Garrett's voice was rough. Sarah would have liked you. You're just stubborn enough to have gotten along. Naomi's expression softened slightly. I wish I could have met her. Yeah, me too. Lars approached, leading his horse. We should go. Lose too much daylight, and we won't make Denver in time. Naomi swung into her saddle. She looked down at Garrett one last time. Keep them together. Whatever happens, keep the Alliance together. That's what Mercer fears most. Then she and Lars were riding out, pushing their horses into a gallop that would eat up miles but exhaust the animals quickly. Garrett watched until they disappeared beyond the ridge. He turned back to find the entire Alliance watching him, waiting for direction. All right, he said. We've got 48 hours. That means we assume Mercer's going to try something before the deadline. He doesn't want to wait for the court. He wants to break us before then. Garrett looked around at the tired, scared, determined faces. So we give him nothing to break. Double the patrols, watch all the main ranches, and for the love of everything, nobody travels alone. Mercer's already killed Grayson. He won't hesitate to kill more of us. What about the properties he's already got claim to? Someone asked. The Miller place? The Carmichael land? We watch those too. If Mercer tries to take possession before the court deadline, we're there to witness it, document everything. Garrett felt like he was making this up as he went, but nobody else had better ideas. And if he tries to force anyone else out in the next 2 days, we respond immediately, together. The crowd dispersed slowly, people heading back to their ranches with instructions to stay alert and stay armed. Garrett found himself standing with Tom Henderson and Eric Jorgensen, the three of them looking at the empty road where Naomi and Lars had vanished. Think they'll make it? Henderson asked. If anyone can, it's those two, Eric said. But he didn't sound convinced. They didn't have to wait long to find out what Mercer had planned. That night, signal fires lit up across the valley. Not the organized warning system the Alliance had set up, but something worse. Actual fires. Actual destruction. 3 ranches burning simultaneously. Garrett rallied everyone who could ride and they split into groups, racing toward the fires. But by the time they arrived at each location, the damage was done. Barns destroyed, fences torn down, livestock scattered. And in each case, the same message painted on whatever walls remained standing. 48 hours. Mercer wasn't waiting for the court. He was enforcing his claim right now, burning out anyone who might resist. The attacks continued through the night. Hit-and-run strikes, always against properties the Alliance was trying to defend. Mercer's men were everywhere, moving in coordinated groups, hitting targets and disappearing before defenders could arrive. By dawn, 7 properties had been damaged. Nobody killed, but that felt more like luck than mercy. The Alliance gathered at the Henderson Ranch as sunrise painted the smoke-filled sky red. Everyone looked exhausted, covered in soot and ash, running on fear and anger. "He's breaking us," Margaret Chen said flatly. "One piece at a time. By the time your 48 hours are up, half of us won't have anything left to fight for." "So we hit back," Lars's younger brother said. Several people nodded agreement. "Hit back how?" Garrett asked. "Burn Mercer's property? Attack his men? That makes us the criminals. Gives the sheriff excuse to arrest us instead of him." "The sheriff's not going to arrest Mercer no matter what we do," Eric Jorgensen said. "So why are we still playing by rules he's already broken?" "Because the moment we stop following the law, we lose any chance of federal help," Garrett said. "The marshals won't intervene to protect vigilantes." "The marshals aren't intervening anyway," someone called out. "Grayson's dead and nobody's coming to investigate. We don't know that." "We know enough." Tom Henderson stood up, his face hard. "My barn's gone. My fences are destroyed. 7 families got hit last night, and Mercer's men are still out there, probably planning the next round of attacks. How much more are we supposed to take before we fight back properly?" Garrett didn't have a good answer. Everything Henderson said was true. They were getting destroyed and playing defense wasn't working. 24 hours, Garrett said finally. "Give Naomi and Lars 24 hours to get back from Denver with something we can use. If they don't make it, if they come back empty-handed." He looked around at the desperate faces. "Then we decide together what comes next." It wasn't a great compromise, but it was the best he could offer. People reluctantly agreed, mostly because they were too tired to argue anymore. The day passed with agonizing slowness. More patrols, more watching, more waiting for the next attack. But Mercer's men stayed quiet, probably resting after their night of destruction. Or planning something bigger. Evening came, still no word from Denver. Garrett sat on Henderson's porch, watching the valley darken. Sarah used to say that hard times revealed who people really were underneath their comfortable faces. She'd been right about that. This valley was full of people Garrett had never paid attention to before, and now he knew exactly what they were made of. Fear, courage, desperation, determination, all mixed together in ways that made them unpredictable. "You think she made it?" Henderson asked, sitting beside him. "I think if anyone could ride to Denver and back in 2 days, it's Naomi Vale." Garrett's voice was more confident than he felt. "She's survived worse. And if she didn't, then we fight with what we have." Garrett looked at him. "Which is each other. That's enough, isn't it?" Henderson didn't answer right away. "My grandfather used to say that sometimes the only choice is between dying on your feet or living on your knees. He fought in the war, saw things that broke him, but he always said he'd choose his feet every time." "Wise man. Dead man." Henderson echoed Naomi's earlier words. "Got killed in a dispute over water rights, actually. Not so different from this." They sat in silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Somewhere out there, Naomi and Lars were riding through darkness toward an uncertain destination. Somewhere in Denver, evidence might or might not exist that could save them all. And somewhere close by, Silas Mercer was planning his next move. Garrett touched the rifle across his knees, thinking about choices and consequences, about fighting and surrendering, about all the ways a person could lose everything that mattered. And he thought about Naomi saying that running doesn't work, that it just means you die tired. He wasn't going to die tired. Whatever happened in the next 24 hours, whatever Mercer threw at them, Garrett Boone was done running. It was time to make a stand. Dawn broke cold and gray over Dry Hollow, the kind of morning that made everything look washed out and temporary. Garrett had been awake for hours, standing outside the courthouse with Tom Henderson and about 30 others from the Alliance. They'd gathered before sunrise, not wanting to miss the deadline, not willing to let Mercer claim victory without witnesses. The 48 hours were up in 20 minutes. No sign of Naomi or Lars. "Maybe they got delayed," Henderson said, but nobody believed it. 2 days was barely enough time to reach Denver and back, and that assumed everything went perfectly. No broken wheels, no lame horses, no trouble on the road, and knowing Mercer, there'd been trouble. Garrett watched the street, willing 2 riders to appear over the ridge. Nothing. Just empty road and cold wind. 5 minutes, someone said. The courthouse doors opened. Judge Whitmore emerged looking like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Behind him came Mercer and Dalton, both impeccably dressed, both wearing expressions of polite victory. "Mr. Boone," Whitmore said heavily, "do you have the evidence you promised?" Garrett's hands tightened on his rifle. "Not yet. But, then I have no choice." Whitmore pulled out the documents. "I hereby approve Mr. Mercer's petition for water rights across the Valley region, effective immediately. All downstream ranchers will be required to negotiate access terms with Mr. Mercer's office within 30 days or face—" "Wait!" A shout from down the street. Everyone turned. A single rider was galloping toward them, horse lathered and stumbling. Not Naomi, not Lars. It was the telegraph operator, a young kid named Billy, waving a paper over his head. "Telegram!" Billy shouted, nearly falling off his horse. "From Denver. Just came through." He shoved the paper at Whitmore, breathing hard. The judge read it, his face going from tired resignation to sharp attention. "What's it say?" Mercer demanded. Whitmore looked up, and for the first time in weeks, he looked alive. "It's from the federal marshal's office in Denver. They've opened an official investigation into Walter Grayson's death and the documents he was carrying. Says here they recovered his personal effects from the boarding house where he was staying, including a complete set of copies he'd left with the proprietor for safekeeping." The crowd erupted in noise. Mercer's face went carefully blank. "Furthermore," Whitmore continued reading, "the documents show clear evidence of systematic fraud involving forged land office seals, fabricated debt records, and coordinated seizures across multiple territories. Federal marshals are en route to Dry Hollow to conduct interviews and make arrests." "Let me see that," Dalton demanded, reaching for the telegram. Whitmore held it away. "The marshals will be here in 3 days. Until then, all property transfers involving Mr. Mercer are suspended pending investigation." "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," Dalton sputtered. "You can't suspend legal proceedings based on a telegram." "I can, and I am. And if you have a problem with it, Counselor, you can take it up with the federal government." Whitmore looked at Mercer directly. "I suggest you make yourself available for questioning when the marshals arrive, Mr. Mercer. Running would look very bad." Mercer's calm facade cracked just slightly. "I have nothing to hide, Your Honor. I'm confident this investigation will clear up any misunderstandings. We'll see." Whitmore turned to Garrett. "Mr. Boone, I owe you and your people an apology. I let procedure and paperwork blind me to what was happening. That won't happen again." Garrett didn't know what to say. They'd won. Not completely, not yet, but enough to stop Mercer's immediate plans. The crowd started celebrating, people shaking hands and embracing. But Garrett kept scanning the road. Where were Naomi and Lars? The telegram had come from Denver, which meant someone had gotten Grayson's evidence to the marshals. But who? Mercer and Dalton were in heated discussion near their carriage. Dutch Carver and the other hired guns stood nearby, hands near their weapons, looking uncertain about what to do. Then Mercer looked directly at Garrett, and his expression was pure hatred. The mask of the polite businessman was gone completely. "This isn't over," Mercer said quietly, but in a voice that carried. "Federal investigations take months, years, and a lot can happen in that time." "Is that a threat?" Tom Henderson asked. "It's a fact." Mercer climbed into his carriage. "Enjoy your temporary victory, gentlemen. I promise it won't last." The carriage rolled away, Dutch and the hired guns following on horseback. Garrett watched them go, feeling no satisfaction. Mercer was right. An investigation didn't mean convictions. Rich men with connections had ways of escaping justice, especially in the territories where federal authority was thin. "We should be celebrating," Margaret Chen said, but she sounded as uncertain as Garrett felt. "We should be preparing," Eric Jorgensen corrected. "Mercer's cornered now. Cornered animals are the most dangerous." Garrett nodded. "Get everyone back to their ranches. Double guards. Assume Mercer's going to lash out before the marshals arrive." The crowd dispersed slowly, relief mixing with continued anxiety. They'd bought time, maybe saved the valley, but the war wasn't over. Garrett stayed in town, waiting. He told himself he was watching for trouble, but really he was watching for Naomi. She rode in just after noon, alone. Garrett's stomach dropped when he saw her. Alone meant something had happened to Lars. She dismounted stiffly, moving like every muscle hurt. "Lars?" Garrett asked. Alive. Stayed in Denver to guide the marshals back here. Naomi accepted water someone offered. We made it there in record time, found Grayson's boarding house. The proprietor, Mrs. Chen, no relation to Margaret, she's this tiny old woman who took one look at us and said Walter had told her someone might come asking. She gave us everything. The documents? Copies of everything. Grayson was thorough. Naomi drank deeply, spilling water down her chin. We took them straight to the marshal's office. They were already investigating his death, treating it as murder. When we showed them the documents, showed them the pattern, she smiled grimly. They mobilized immediately. Lars stayed to answer questions and lead them back here. I rode ahead to make sure the court deadline didn't pass. The telegram arrived just in time, Garrett said. That was Lars's idea. Send word ahead while he stayed to help the investigation. Naomi swayed slightly. Garrett caught her arm. When's the last time you slept? What day is it? She laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. I don't even know. We rode straight through, changing horses at every station, barely stopping. I think I slept maybe 4 hours total. Come on. Garrett led her toward the boarding house. You need rest. I need to know what happened here. Did Whitmore approve Mercer's petition? No, the telegram stopped him. Mercer's under investigation now. His property claims are suspended. Naomi stopped walking. We won? We bought time. The actual fight starts when the marshals get here and Mercer has to answer for what he's done. But we stopped him. From taking the water rights. From controlling the valley. Naomi's eyes were wet. My father never got this far. He fought for 2 years and never once made Mercer answer for anything. Your father didn't have you, Garrett said quietly. Or Grayson, or Lars, or everyone in this valley who decided to stand together. That made the difference. She leaned against him, just for a moment, allowing herself to feel the exhaustion. Then she straightened up. Where's Mercer now? Left town with his men, threatened us on the way out, but didn't do anything. He will. Naomi's voice was certain. He's lost legal ground, which means he'll resort to other methods. We need to be ready. She was right, but Garrett was too relieved to have her back to worry about it immediately. First you rest, then we prepare. The attack came that night, not against the ranches, against the town. Garrett was walking back to where he'd stabled his horse when he smelled smoke. Not wood smoke from chimneys. Something chemical. Something wrong. He ran toward the smell and found the land office burning. Flames were already through the roof, consuming everything inside. Someone had doused the place in kerosene and lit it deliberately. Fire! Garrett shouted, but people were already running toward it with buckets. Tom Henderson appeared beside him. The records. All the property records are in there. They both knew what that meant. Every deed, every survey, every document proving who owned what in the entire valley. All of it turning to ash. Mercer, Garrett said, has to be. Without the records, proving anything becomes impossible. They fought the fire, but it was a losing battle. The building was old and dry, and whoever set it had known exactly how to make sure it burned completely. By the time the flames died, nothing remained but a smoking foundation and twisted metal file cabinets. The land clerk stood in the ruins, weeping. 40 years of records, gone. How do we even know who owns what anymore? Copies, Naomi said, appearing out of the smoke-filled darkness. Some people kept copies of their deeds, and the territorial office in the capital has backup records for major transactions. Major transactions, yes, but small transfers, family inheritances, boundary adjustments? The clerk shook his head. Those were only recorded here. They're gone. Garrett looked at the destroyed building and understood Mercer's strategy. If the physical records were gone, his forged documents became just as valid as anyone else's claims. It muddied the waters, made everything disputable. This is what he does, Naomi said quietly, standing beside Garrett. When he can't win legally, he destroys the legal system itself, makes everything chaos. We still have the copies Grayson made. For some properties, not all. She looked exhausted and defeated. And without the original records to compare them to, how do we prove Mercer's documents are the fake ones and not the other way around? Sheriff Cooper appeared, making a show of investigating the scene. He asked questions, took statements, and generally did everything except actually try to solve the crime. Probably some drunk knocked over a lamp, the sheriff concluded. The land office was locked and empty, Henderson pointed out. How would a drunk get inside? Broken window. Happens all the time. The sheriff clearly wasn't interested in pursuing it further. I'll file a report, but I wouldn't expect much. Because the sheriff worked for Mercer. Everyone knew it. Nobody could prove it. The next morning, Judge Whitmore called an emergency town meeting. Everyone crowded into what was left of the courthouse, which suddenly felt like the only official building left standing. The destruction of the land office is a catastrophe, Whitmore said bluntly. I won't pretend otherwise. But it doesn't change the fundamental situation. The federal marshals are still coming. Mr. Mercer is still under investigation. And I'm still suspending all property transfers until we sort this out. How? Someone asked. Without records, how do we sort anything out? We start with what we have, people's testimony about what they own, any personal copies of deeds, surveys from private companies, tax records from the territorial office. Whitmore looked old and tired. It'll be slow and contentious, but it's better than letting Mercer win by default. Mercer wasn't at the meeting. He'd retreated to his hotel, surrounded by hired guns, waiting for the marshals to arrive. The next 2 days were tense. The Alliance maintained patrols, expecting more attacks, but nothing came. Mercer was lying low, probably on his lawyer's advice. Don't give the marshals any fresh crimes to investigate. Lars rode in on the third day, leading 4 federal marshals and bringing news from Denver. Grayson's murder is officially being treated as an assassination, Lars reported to the gathered crowd. They found the man who killed him, hired knife from out of state. He talked in exchange for avoiding the noose, said he was paid to eliminate Grayson and recover any documents. Paid by who? Garrett asked. He didn't know names. The money came through intermediaries. Lars looked around. But the marshals have enough to bring charges. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy, maybe murder depending on what else they find. The head marshal, a hard-faced man named Caldwell, stepped forward. We'll be conducting interviews over the next week. Anyone who's had dealings with Silas Mercer, anyone who's lost property, anyone who has evidence of fraudulent documents, we need to talk to you. People started volunteering immediately, eager to tell their stories. The marshals set up in the hotel, taking statements one after another. Mercer was arrested on the 5th day. Not for murder. The connection to Grayson's killer was still circumstantial, but for fraud and forgery. The marshals had examined the copies of documents Grayson had compiled, compared them to what remained of the territorial records, and found enough discrepancies to file formal charges. Dutch Carver and 3 other men were arrested alongside him. Garrett watched from across the street as Mercer was led out in handcuffs. The man who'd terrorized an entire valley, who destroyed families and stolen livelihoods, looked small suddenly. Not dangerous, just tired and angry. Mercer saw Garrett watching. This isn't over, Boone. I have lawyers, connections. I'll fight every charge, and even if some stick, I'll be out in a few years, and when I am, he smiled coldly, I'll remember everyone who testified against me. Then I guess you better hope those lawyers are good, Garrett said. They took Mercer away to face trial in Denver. His hired guns scattered, heading for other territories where their particular skills might be needed. His properties were seized pending resolution of the fraud charges. The valley started to breathe again. It wasn't perfect. Lots of families had still lost homes, livestock, livelihoods. The Miller family was living in someone else's barn. The Carmichaels had left for Kansas, unable to face rebuilding. The Paulsons were gone too. But the ones who remained started helping each other rebuild. Eric Jorgensen organized work parties that rotated between damaged ranches, fixing barns and houses together. Margaret Chen's place was repaired in a week, with everyone contributing labor and materials. The land office was rebuilt slowly, and clerks from the territorial office spent months reconstructing records from whatever sources they could find. It was messy and imperfect, but gradually people's property claims were reestablished and documented. 3 months later, word came from Denver. Mercer had been convicted on 14 counts of fraud and forgery. Sentenced to 20 years. His appeals had been denied. The valley celebrated quietly. No big parties, no parades, just a collective sense of relief that the fight was finally over. Garrett stood on his porch that evening, looking out at land that felt like home again for the first time in 3 years. The ranch was still a work in progress. He'd bought cattle with money borrowed from the territorial bank, rebuilt fences with help from the Jorgensens, planted crops that Naomi insisted would do well in the soil. Naomi. She was still here, living in the cabin, working the ranch alongside him. They hadn't talked about what that meant exactly, hadn't defined their relationship beyond practical partnership. But it worked. She understood Silence the way Sarah had, knew when to push him and when to leave him alone. She emerged from the barn now, carrying tools she'd been using to repair a stall. Her dress was patched and worn, her hands permanently roughened from work. She looked nothing like the desperate woman who'd broken into his house months ago. She looked like someone who belonged. "Dinner's not going to make itself," Naomi said, climbing the porch steps. "I'll cook," Garrett offered. "You'll burn everything. I've tasted your cooking." But she was smiling. "How about we both cook? That way, if it's terrible, we can blame each other." They went inside together, falling into the comfortable rhythm they'd developed. She started the fire, he pulled out ingredients, they worked around each other in the small kitchen like they'd been doing it for years. "Tom Henderson stopped by while you were in town," Naomi said, chopping vegetables. "His new barn's finished. He's throwing a gathering this weekend to celebrate. Wants everyone to come." Everyone meaning the Alliance? Everyone meaning the Valley. He figures after everything that happened, people should get together for something that isn't fighting or defending or mourning. Garrett thought about it. "Yeah, all right. We'll go." Naomi glanced at him. "You sure? I know crowds aren't your favorite." "I'm sure." And he was. These weren't strangers anymore. They were people he'd fought beside, bled with, protected, and been protected by. That meant something. They ate dinner as the sun set, talking about plans for the ranch. They needed more pasture cleared, the irrigation channel needed work, and if they were going to expand the herd next year, they'd need a bigger barn. "We," Naomi said suddenly. "What? You keep saying we. We need more pasture. We need irrigation work." She set down her fork. Are you asking me to stay? Permanently?" Garrett looked at her across the table. This woman who'd appeared in his darkest moment like an answer to a question he hadn't known how to ask. Who'd fought beside him, challenged him, refused to let him give up or surrender or retreat into the lonely isolation that had nearly killed him. "Yeah," he said, "I'm asking you to stay." "As what? A hired hand? A partner?" "As whatever you want to be." Garrett's voice was rough. "I'm not good at this. Talking about feelings, making promises. Sarah used to say I had all the romantic charm of a fence post, but I know that this place is better with you here. I'm better with you here, and I don't want that to change." Naomi's eyes were bright. "I spent a year running from everything that hurt. From Mercer, from memories, from the person I became after my father died. I didn't think I'd ever stop. But then I broke into your cabin and you gave me 3 days. She smiled. "Worst 3-day deadline ever. You're the one who kept extending it, because I finally found a reason to stop running." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "So yes, I'll stay, as your partner in the ranch and everything else." It wasn't a proposal, wasn't a declaration of undying love, it was something more practical and more real. Two broken people deciding that being broken together was better than being alone. The weekend gathering at the Henderson place was bigger than expected. 40 or 50 people from across the valley bringing food and drink, kids running around playing while adults talked and laughed. Someone had a fiddle. Someone else had a guitar. Music started up, the first real music the valley had heard in months. Garrett found himself talking to people he barely knew, hearing their stories, learning how they'd survived the Mercer years. Everyone had scars. Everyone had losses. But they were still here, still rebuilding, still believing that the land they'd fought for was worth keeping. Eric Jorgensen pulled Garrett aside at one point. "Been meaning to ask, you planning to run for sheriff?" "What? No, why would I do that?" "Because Cooper's gone. Fled town when the marshals started asking too many questions about his relationship with Mercer." Eric grinned. "We need someone. Someone people trust. Someone who proved they'll stand up when things get hard. I'm not a lawman. Neither was Cooper, technically. He was just a man with a badge who happened to work for the wrong side." Eric clapped him on the shoulder. "Think about it. Valley needs someone looking out for it officially." Garrett watched the gathering, all these people who'd come together in crisis and somehow become a community. Maybe Eric had a point. Maybe the Valley did need someone official to make sure another Mercer couldn't just walk in and start over. But not now. Now he had a ranch to rebuild and a partner who was probably going to argue with him about every decision he made and a future that actually felt possible again. Naomi found him as the sun was setting, the party still going strong. Lars Jorgensen asked me to dance, she said. I told him I don't dance. Why not? Because I wanted to ask you instead. She held out her hand. Dance with me, Garrett Boone. I'm not much of a dancer. Neither am I. We'll be terrible together. So they danced, awkward and off rhythm, while the fiddle played and the valley celebrated surviving another day, another fight, another test of whether people could actually stand together when it mattered. And Garrett thought about Sarah, about how she would have loved this, the music, the community, the sense of belonging to something bigger than yourself. She would have loved Naomi too, would have appreciated her strength and stubbornness and refusal to quit. What are you thinking? Naomi asked. That I spent 3 years believing the only way to survive losing someone was to stop living. Garrett looked around at the gathered crowd. But that's not survival. That's just slow death. And now? Now I think maybe the point isn't to avoid losing things. It's to build things worth losing, to care about people and places enough that losing them would hurt. He met her eyes. To actually live instead of just existing. Naomi smiled. That's almost poetic for a fence post. Don't push it. They danced until the music stopped, then stayed for the stories and laughter that followed. Stayed until the stars came out and the children fell asleep in their parents' arms. Stayed because this was what they'd fought for. Not just land or water rights or legal victories. This, community, connection. The knowledge that when darkness came, you didn't have to face it alone. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Naomi dozed in her saddle, exhausted from dancing and celebrating. Garrett kept watch, still not entirely trusting that danger was past. But the valley was quiet, peaceful, safe, for now. They reached the cabin and Naomi dismounted stiffly. I'm getting too old for all-day parties. You're 25. 26 next month. Ancient. She stretched, yawning. I'm going to sleep for a week. Good. You've earned it. She paused at the door. Garrett? Thank you. For what? For letting me stay. For fighting with me instead of against me. For not giving up. She looked at him seriously. My father taught me to stand up for what mattered. But you taught me that sometimes standing up means standing together. She went inside before he could respond. Garrett stayed outside for a while longer, looking at the mountains black against the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there, other valleys faced their own Mercers, their own fights against men who thought power meant taking whatever they wanted from whoever was weakest. But here, in this valley, people had learned something different. That power could also mean standing together, protecting each other, building something that couldn't be burned down because it existed in the connections between people, not just in buildings and property lines. It wasn't a perfect lesson. People had still lost homes, families had still fled. Grayson had died. The scars of the Mercer years would last for generations. But they'd survived. And in surviving together, they'd become something stronger than they'd been separate. Garrett went inside and found Naomi already asleep in the chair by the fireplace, still in her party clothes, too tired to make it to bed. He covered her with a blanket and banked the fire. Tomorrow they'd start work on clearing the new pasture. The day after, they'd help the Millers finish rebuilding their house. Next week, there was talk of organizing a proper school so the Valley children didn't have to ride 20 miles for education. Life continuing. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but continuing anyway, the way life does when people decide it's worth the effort. Garrett Boone had spent 3 years learning how to be alone. Now he was learning something harder and better. How to be part of something bigger than himself. How to build instead of just endure. How to let people in even when it was scary, even when it risked more loss. He sat by the fire, listening to Naomi breathe, feeling the solid presence of home around him. Outside, the valley slept under stars that had watched it survive worse than Silas Mercer. The land would be here long after everyone currently fighting over it was dust. But the people who worked it, who defended it, who built communities on it, they mattered in the brief time they had. Garrett understood that now. Some things were worth fighting for. Not because the fight was easy or the outcome certain, but because in the fighting, in the standing together, in the refusal to surrender what mattered, that's where you found out who you really were. And what he'd found was simple. He was someone who'd let a stranger into his dark cabin, someone who'd chosen to fight instead of hide, someone who'd learned, slowly and painfully, that the worst thing you could lose wasn't your land or your home or even your life. The worst thing you could lose was the willingness to keep going, to keep building, to keep believing that tomorrow might be better than today. Garrett hadn't lost that. Not completely. And with Naomi beside him and the alliance standing strong, he didn't think he ever would again. The fire burned low. The cabin grew quiet. And somewhere in the darkness, a new day was already beginning.